Good afternoon. At this time, we'd like to call to order the Rail Committee meeting of the City of Palo Alto for Tuesday, April 16th, 2024. Would the clerk please call the roll?
Councilmember Lithcott-Hames.
Here.
Chair Burt.
Here.
Councilmember Lowing.
Here.
All present.
Okay. So at this time, our first item is to allow members of the public to speak on any items that are not otherwise on the agenda. And I do want to get a clarification because some of the public speakers are going to want to be heard under public comment. If action item 1 lists no public testimony will be heard at this meeting. And so that's because we already accepted testimony on that. But there are members of the public who are becoming more interested and engaged. Is that at our discretion to allow members of the public? Okay. So what I'm going to do is there will in fact be an opportunity for additional public comment, even though we had some at the full opportunity for it at the March 19th meeting. But on item 1, there will be an opportunity for public comment, so people don't need to speak at this time if they want to speak to item 1. If you already spoke at the last meeting and really conveyed your positions, then please let that be the record. But new people who didn't get a chance to speak, we certainly want to give them that opportunity. Having said all that, now we have public comment for any items that are not on the agenda.
We have no request to speak.
Okay, thanks. All right, then we next have updates from on interagency activities on Caltrain, VTA, and city staff. And so first from regarding Caltrain. Okay.
Yeah. Good afternoon. I want to begin by thanking the Rail Committee and members of the public for the opportunity to share this update today. My name is Navi Dhaliwal, Government Community Affairs Officer at Caltrain, and I'm joined today with my colleagues whom you all have met previously, Edgar Torres online with Kimberly Horn providing engineering and design consultation with the Connecting Palo Alto Grade Separation Project, and to my left, Mike Rabinowitz, Caltrain's project manager for the item number 1 that's going to be talked later this afternoon. Given the first item on today's meeting agenda, I'll be focusing this update on Caltrain's electrification milestones. Caltrain has successfully tested and energized all of the corridor from San Francisco to San Jose. And now that we have fully energized the corridor, the last remaining step is to make sure that the trains are fully tested and certified before we put them into service later this year. Testing will continue most weeknights between San Francisco and San Jose between 10 p.m. and 4 a.m. with 1 to 2 trains per hour. As we ramp up testing and get ready to place these new quieter trains into service, we are coordinating with schools and safe routes to school associations along the corridor to get rail safety messages out to students and residents. We are planning to table at East Meadow Crossing and Churchill Crossing in early May to share rail safety messages with students utilizing those crossings. We want to remind everyone to always wait for the gate to rise before crossings and that trains can travel on any track at any time and in any direction. You can learn more at www.caltrain.com/safety and gather more information if need be. We have our next public train tour on May 11th at San Carlos Station. And then you can get more information or details from myself today or online at caltrain.com/tour, TOUR. Lastly, we are working with the city and Stanford to hold an additional electric train tour at Palo Alto Station and are working to confirm a date for that tour. We are tentatively looking at June 1st, but we'll continue to confirm that within the next week or so. So appreciate, staff members here today, council members, and the Stanford staff for coordinating on this upcoming event. And that will conclude my update. Thank you.
And if it's okay, I'll just add that as Navi had mentioned, we're looking for a date to have a tour of the new electrified trains. The date at which we are planning to fully electrify is September 26th, is that Have I got it right?
Tentatively, yes, correct.
And that's not the 25th or the 27th, which means we're getting very precise on that full launch date. And it's not a ambiguous someday in the future we're going to do it. It's that explicit. But at the event where we'll have the new trains available, everybody's going to be able to it's not kick the tires, kick the wheels, and see what really the new trains are like and the full Wi-Fi, and it's kind of a business class experience on Caltrain. And in advance of that station event, there is work being done by the agencies who share responsibility for the station to spruce up the station, which is overdue. And we're anxiously looking forward to a station that will really be in condition that when we do the electrification launch, it will help attract people to the trains rather than be a detraction. Okay. And then does staff have VTA update? Oh, I should add one other important thing that's going on with Caltrain right now, which is state legislation, SB 1031, which is co-authored by Senators Wiener and Wahab. And it has really two elements to it. One is to authorize a regional funding measure to really do a number of things, but principally to address the fiscal cliff that a number of the transit agencies are facing. The other part, that's Senator Wiener's part of it. Senator Wahab's is really looking, they backed off somewhat on the wording, but a evaluation of consolidating transit agencies in the region. And there are a lot of negotiations going on right now on the actual final wording or in that bill. But both Caltrain and VTA, and for that matter, Samtrans, have all taken a position of oppose unless amended. In the case of VTA, it was oppose unless significantly amended. As written, we have very significant concerns that it could be detrimental to our transit agencies. Now, that can still be changed. We'll see what happens. But I want to make sure everybody has that on the radar because we're the rail committee and not just the grade separation committee. All right, Philip.
There we go. Thank you very much. Actually, before I get into the city staff, I believe we have Jason Kim from VTA on the line. And I'm not sure, Jason, did you have interest in providing a VTA update?
Yeah, I can provide a brief VTA update. We just want to notify this committee of a study that will be starting up very shortly. So we know that the Palo Alto Transit Center has been an area of focus for a lot of us agencies kind of in the area. And so we're hoping to start a new study of the area sometime within the next handful of months. Essentially, we've already discussed this, kind of briefly met with a lot of the other transit providers in the area, including Caltrain, Samtrans, as well as Stanford and the city of Palo Alto. And so we're going to be convening a group starting sometime with the next handful of months to talk about what near-term projects we can do in the area, as well as start developing the scope for a much longer-term project, including access planning, circulation planning, and land use planning for the intermodal mobility hub. And so, yeah, we just want to bring a brief update to this group because this item is related to the rail corridor. It's, adjacent to the Palo Alto Transit intermodal station, as well as relatively close to the Palo Alto Ave crossing. So we just want to, bring this update to let the committee know that this project will hopefully be starting up soon.
One thing caught my attention out of what you said was to begin that process in the next couple of months. It was my understanding that we were going to begin that process in the coming weeks and not months. And that concerns me given that we only have a limited number of months before we're going to have the electrification launch. And so I would just leave that as a comment for us to follow up on. But it's been a couple of months since we did 2 tours there. And my anticipation was that we were going to get going on that really promptly. So I'll look forward to us beginning that in weeks rather than months. Okay, Philip?
Okay, thank you very much, Jason. Philip Kami, Chief Transportation Official. I've got a list of things here. The Quiet Zones project, we've requested review of the currently 70% plans for Palo Alto Avenue by Caltrain, CPUC, and FRA staff, in addition to our internal review. And we're coordinating with Caltrain right now on a service agreement to prepare to get a service agreement prepared and executed for this review. For Churchill, Meadow, and Charleston crossings, we've conducted the kickoff meeting, and the consultant's currently reviewing the existing conditions. Regarding grants, the CalSTA and TIRCP funding, we heard feedback. We'd received funding for the Churchill Avenue, and of course, we requested for all of the crossings, but we were awarded for Churchill. However, in discussing with the State Department, they've recently informed staff that we can reprogram the funding to all 3 crossings. So it's going to be authorized and will enable us to reprogram the funding for all 3 crossings. The funding's anticipated to complete the final design, and it's planned for programming to be allocated in FY 26-27. Regarding the FRA grant, we've been meeting with FRA, met in March. We're also collaborating with Caltrain and VTA for the development of a funding agreement and the funding allocation and programming. Excuse me. And the objective is to have it executed by June or July of 2024. I'm still waiting on the FRA for that in order to actually execute it. We're coordinating with VTA for the necessary agreements that would be needed between the city, Caltrain, and VTA for the PE and environmental phase. And in some more good news, the FRA has informed us that they will be the lead agency for the grade separation project, not California High-Speed Rail. So the FRA is now evaluating the level of environmental documentation that will be needed. So yeah, potentially good. Yeah, potentially some good news regarding that. The concerns that we had last time regarding that. Regarding the Section 190 grant application that we had, staff attended the CPUC hearing on April 3rd, and we raised the question about the evaluation criteria and suggested to include pedestrian and bicycle traffic, including the sensitivity to school-aged pedestrians in the evaluation criteria. However, the CPUC staff indicated that the revision to the criteria is a longer process, and that in the past years, the committee really didn't hear significant concerns, and didn't receive much input on the formula and the criteria. And so there hasn't been much movement on that in this past several years. And that said, the CPUC did value our input and said that they'll raise the concerns to their management for consideration of the evaluation. And with that, just the last couple updates that I have are regarding the study session with, I should say, upcoming meetings that we have, which include the study session that we have on grade separation activities on April 29th, 2024. And we're currently working on scheduling a public meeting on grade separation for May 2024, and potentially looking at mid-May. And with that, happy to take any questions.
Can I ask one follow-up on when you were talking about the CPUC's response? That was to us as a city giving feedback on criteria?
Good morning, this is Ripon with the Office of Transportation. So California Public Utilities Commission did a public hearing to consider the priority for the prioritization of the projects in California. As part of that public hearing, city staff, at least I made a comment that was in conjunction with what Rail Committee has previously informed us, and we have raised the concern to include the sensitivity to the bicycles and pedestrian traffic to be considered for these kind of prioritization criteria. And they have indicated that yes, it is valuable, but the process is longer and comprehensive, and it has to go through the full legislature process in order to do the modifications. And as a part of this next evaluation, they can consider in the process and bring it to the management for further refinement to the formula feasible.
Thank you. A reason that I was asking is that in addition to our own city initiatives, we at Caltrain have the corridor crossing strategy, which is looking at the whole corridor, and every one of these crossings as a concern over the criteria. And I think that we as Caltrain may want to engage with CPUC on that. As well as at VTA, we have a grade crossing ad hoc committee. And so we at VTA could engage on that as well. You know, one city speaking as a more limited voice, but these two major agencies might be heard and responded to. Okay, thanks. Yeah. Ed?
I just wanted to understand that first one that you said that the grant, which was for Churchill, was it applicable to all three crossings in any proportion that we want?
So what we requested is that they equally or somewhat equally distribute them. Due to rounding errors, we couldn't exactly perfectly distribute it, but equally distribute it
In three
amongst the
parts.
three parts. Yeah.
Okay, thanks.
Thank you. I just want to point out, first of all, how fortunate we are that Chair Burt is on the VTA board, the Caltrain board, and on the city council. There is a confluence of issues and a talent that he's bringing to this. I mean, it really makes for opportune decision making, and I just want to acknowledge that. I did have a question, Navi, for you on the rail safety tabling at Meadow and Charleston. Could you say a little bit more about where you envision actually doing that? It sounds fascinating, but also dangerous and complicated.
No, thank you, thank you, Councilmember Lythcott-Ames. We are working with right now our external affairs manager, Brent Tietjen, and I believe you've met Chief Safety Officer Mike Meter on the logistics of the event. And so whilst I do not have the details today, I'm happy to follow up via email with additional information to ensure that we're coordinating safely to bring this issue or just this discussion to light with these students. So we'll make sure that we provide you all with the logistics and additional details as soon as we've confirmed those.
Okay, thank you.
All right. I think that concludes our updates. We didn't have public speakers on this as an item anyway. So that lets us move into our first action item, a big one, which is a review of grade separation alternatives for Churchill, Meadow, and Charleston, including consideration of Caltrain staff's comments, and to provide feedback and direction to staff, and to recommend that council advances or eliminates specific alternatives for preliminary engineering and the environmental documentation phase. We already had a discussion of this at our March meeting. And so this is a continuation of that. So, Philip, are there staff kind of updates or any staff presentation related to the continuation of this?
No additional or new presentation. Thank you.
Okay. All right. So we really need to think about how we're going to frame this discussion. But maybe before we begin our follow-up, we can first hear from members of the public.
We don't have any speakers on item number 1. Oh, one person just raised his hand. Okay, we got some folks coming in now.
Through the chair.
Yeah.
Do we want to look at item 2 relates to the Kellogg seal conversation? And that, I don't know if that needs to be discussed before you decide what alternatives you're going to move ahead on, because it will provide some clarification, or do you, it's up to staff. I don't really, just a
Yeah,
question.
well, that's a good question. it seems that item 2 may help inform item 1 and whether we should change the sequence of our discussion today for that reason.
Sorry, I think that is, should be within your,
Okay.
yeah,
All
authority.
right, so why don't we go ahead and take the comments on item 1 with an understanding that we're then going to table item 1 for a little while and discuss item 2, which is the review of bicycle and ped crossings in the vicinity of Churchill, basically discussing the options of Kellogg and Seal as locations. But having said that, let's go ahead and go to public comment on item 1.
Our first speaker is Michael Wessel, followed by Q Lee. Michael, you should be able to unmute your microphone.
Hello, can you hear me?
Yes.
Very well.
Great. Hello, council members. Yesterday, Palo Alto approved a new housing element plan that will add over 6,000 units to Palo Alto to increase affordability and inclusivity, subject to the state's approval. Conversely, using housing acquisitions for grade separation will reduce available housing. Council, please consider including a contingency plan that prioritizes a group of single-family homes for the families on Charleston Road who would face financial devastation and loss of their communities if the underpass with roundabout was selected for grade separation on our street. Housing acquisitions would be tantamount to banishing them from Palo Alto, as fair market value could never begin to cover their losses. Understandably, both the rail plans and housing elements will require extensive engineering and planning work to achieve their goals, which will take some time. This allows the city time to partner and negotiate with developers to include a small group of townhomes for families impacted by full housing acquisitions, should the need arise. Plans that include rehousing current residents would offset the loss of these homes in the housing plan numbers, and most importantly, keep current Palo Altans within our city. Thank you.
Our next speaker is Q Lee.
Hello, can you hear me?
Yes.
Thank you. Thank you for giving me a chance to comment. I'd like to comment about the Churchill crossing. And I attended all AXCAM meetings and closely followed the discussions and concerns raised from the meeting. And I learned about the issues about budget, construction period, environmental neighborhood destruction, blah, blah, blah. And I agreed with the AXCAM members that the closure of Churchill is the most favorable option. And I know that now we are discussing about the partial underpass for the Churchill crossing. So we have to think about what is the goal of this, connecting Palo Alto. It's not just about cars, but also about people walking on the sidewalk and cyclists. The partial underpass presents safety hazard for pedestrians and cyclists using Alma Street. Partial underpass require widening the road that is necessary. In order to widen the road, we have to delete the landscaping, the tree lane. And if you walk on Alma, you will agree with me that the landscaping serves as the primary barrier between pedestrians, cyclists, and vehicles in Alma. So I think without adequate landscaping, Alma will become an inhospitable street for pedestrians and cyclists. Also, the partial underpass fails to address the need of the residents living on the east side of Alma. My biggest concern is with the residents living on Alma Street. They'll be affected very, very seriously. They cannot make left turn onto the Alma, even though their house is on Alma, their driveway is connected to Alma. And they cannot make a left turn from Alma to their home. So it will decrease the quality of their life dramatically. And I know that there's another, the discussion topic, option, the agenda number 2 about the crossing option between Seal and Kellogg. And I read the materials, and the material described all the advantages of Seal crossing compared to Kellogg. So I want to point out one thing not presented there, which is the presence of Castelleja School on 200 block of Kellogg. The Kellogg is already busy with cars during pickup and drop-off time. And if you make a tunnel on Kellogg, that will increase the traffic congestion and definitely will create the safety hazard for cyclists and students. So I urge City Council to prioritize the option recommended by XCAP, which is arrived with through discussion and consideration. The closure of Churchill coupled with the sail crossing represent the most viable solution for our community. Thank you.
Our next speaker is Patrice Banal. We can hear you.
Okay, great. So I live on Charleston and Mumford. I'm one of the homes that right now with the underpass and the traffic circle may be slated for a partial take, which makes me more fortunate than my neighbors to the left of me who their homes on the current plans no longer exist. I want to say that I believe that nowhere in the city of Palo Alto is eminent domain something we should be doing. We can find other creative ways and existing infrastructure to move traffic. Our goal here needs to be moving traffic, not families. And as Michael said, given the current market conditions for our families, the financial devastation my neighbors and I would face would be tantamount to banishing us from Palo Alto. And to be very clear, we are a neighborhood of multi-generational homes. We are a mixture of ethnicities. We are a mixture of incomes. We are the diversity you're seeking to bring with the housing element. We want to stay in our homes. This is the community I chose for my family. This is where I raise my nieces and allow them to be part of our wonderful education system, which you have to know is absolute life changer for first-gen families. It's where I house my 87-year-old mother and take care of her, take her to Stevens. It's JLS, it's Fair Meadow, it's Preschool Family, it's Abilities United, which has taken my two older children from needing specialized care to speaking at the gun graduation. We have invested not just in our homes, but in our community. And we really want to stay here where we have made a footprint, where we have our multi-generational houses, where we are part of a very vibrant community that has supported us in a multitude of ways. It's the part of Palo Alto that is the finest. So to erase us from the fabric of our community, which is the certainty that would happen with eminent domain, is completely disheartening and really not the Palo Alto way. It's not the Palo Alto I signed up for. It's not the Palo Alto you opened your homes to. It's not the Palo Alto for the future. There are other ways we can do this. If we must have an underpass, have the underpass go through as an east to west conduit. However, we can become more creative, use existing infrastructure to move cars around instead of going with this crazy, very, very large and unwieldy traffic circle. We could move traffic, whether it was Eli to Mumford, we could find creative ways to do this. And I think that it's something that we have to challenge ourselves to do. We have lived here for over a decade with the fear of, do I put a new roof on my house? Do I not? Because it really probably isn't my house. And the planning department, Ripon has been amazing in working with us to understand what the plan looks like, but also understand that for us, it's a constant pressure. We bought here, we pay taxes, it's our community.
Your time is up.
No, that was the time that started for her, I think. All right. In any case, please choose an option that doesn't divide the community and keeps us here. Thank you.
Our next speaker is Adrian Brandt.
Thank you. I was just waiting for the unmute. Yeah, I just wanted to comment a little bit more on what was said at the last meeting, and that has to do with Caltrain's analysis of the viaduct alternative. And just further information is that right now with 15-foot track centers, the existing electrified tracks fit in a 72-foot envelope in Redwood City where they do have 4 tracks. And so that includes the electrification poles. So that's one point to remember. So 72 feet can fit four electrified tracks today with existing Caltrain, a brand new construction. And so when Caltrain says that it needs to swing the viaduct out over Alma and take half of Alma, that doesn't pass the smell test. The right of way, even with the jog that was mentioned, the clear path is 90 feet wide, even including the jog, if you take away the parts that overlap. And so there is no reason why Caltrain and the city cannot design a viaduct that stays and has all the key advantages of a viaduct by staying entirely within the existing right of way with no homes or city properties taken. The prior speaker talked about eminent domain, preserving all level ground bike, ped, and vehicle movements across the rail line, the existing movements, and making them easier, of course, and creating a new level ground area and some connectivity across and along the tracks that never existed before that could be used for potentially a future greenway. It doesn't need to be developed immediately alongside or underneath the viaduct. And also, of course, the potential for the least construction time and least impact to existing traffic movements and properties. Now, what Caltrain did with all of its brand new and unprecedented requirements and extra width and clearances and side maintenance vehicle roads, and then an unprecedented request that I still do not understand for retaining the old shoe fly tracks for parking purposes or some vague thing. It's that totally right there wiped out all the advantages of the viaduct. So clearly, it would appear that they're sandbagging that alternative for whatever reason. They don't want it, and if we're going to be good faith negotiators and honest about it, we should either demand that we come up with a design that fits in the right of way, which it can, as the Toronto Davenport Diamond project amply demonstrates. I've emailed you YouTube links to that, and move ahead. Otherwise, there's absolutely no reason to continue playing at completely infeasible viaduct designs. Thank you.
Our next speaker is Elizabeth Alexis. Elizabeth, you should be able to unmute.
Hi, thank you, rail member committees for listening to all of us. I'm obviously speaking in favor of continuing study on the underpass at Charleston and East Meadow. I would add, though, along with one of the previous speakers, that I do think this alternative still needs a lot of fine tuning and a lot of work, and using a different kind of perspective on managing traffic throughout the area, and not the way we normally do this. And I think the East Meadow solution needs a lot of work. So I was a little concerned to see that we are not moving forward with a selection process for a consultant and engineers to work with us that are a little bit more bike focused and perhaps are working on these other kinds of traffic control so that we can limit the scope and scale of whatever would be built. So so first, just supporting the underpass for all sorts of reasons. I do think it is the only solution that deals with the long-term issues related to just simply the intersection at Alma and Charleston, which I think it's just not going to make it for the long run. It also is the only alternative that would allow for potentially additional bike traffic calming for bicycles on the section between El Camino and Alma. And I do think that if we look at the broader network, that it is for bicycles and has a lot of advantages if we can look at the bike network all the way down to Mitchell Park. So again, yes, please support continuing study of this, but also I think we should be starting that process of procurement so that we can start fine-tuning this so that people are not sitting there not knowing whether or not their houses would need to be purchased. Thank you.
Our next speaker is M. Mook Surivasan.
Thank you for giving me the opportunity to speak to the larger group. I've been a resident of Palo Alto since the 70s. I was raised in Palo Alto schools. My children were raised in Palo Alto schools. And I know when we returned in the 90s, this was a discussion point on grade separation. They continuously were effectively moving it down into the future for other committees to make decisions. That is almost 30 years ago with no decisions made. At this point, a decision should be made. I voted for my members to represent me to make the decision that is long-term beneficial to Palo Alto. The continuous reassessment and reconsidering and continuous rehashing of what should be done needs to come to an end, and a decision should be made so that we understand the amount of disruption that is in a finite time scale, because we know what will occur, the timelines for it, and we can get on with our lives. Mainly, we voted for you to make the decision because there are so many competing voices on this very, very important decision. So please make the decision that is beneficial for all Palo Altans moving forward. Thank you. I cede my time.
Our final speaker is B. Riley. You should be unmuted.
Good afternoon. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Good afternoon, City Council. And I guess I have 4.5 minutes. Thank you. Just kidding. I'm a mom and a Palo Alto resident. I live on Kellogg Avenue, and the proposed Churchill partial underpass has serious pedestrian safety and traffic oversights, some of which were touched on by some of the previous speakers. One that wasn't, I do want to bring up and reiterate another 2 points. So the first is that Alma northbound merges to one lane at Melville over Embarcadero and becomes a 25-mile-per-hour zone north of that bridge. This is the start of the commercial downtown area. Traffic already backs up during rush hour in the northbound direction south of Kellogg due to these reasons. So it makes absolutely no sense to propose 3 lanes northbound Alma that merge down to 1 lane in only 1 block. This would be a traffic nightmare and makes no sense. Additionally, it's going to create safety issues for traffic, bike, and pedestrians. The proposal also eliminates the median between the sidewalk on Alma and the 50-mile-an-hour rate on traffic on Alma northbound. This is a no-go with regards to pedestrians and student safety. So why this was even proposed in the first place, right across from the high school in a city with a known student mental health issue and suicide crisis, both Palo Alto and Stanford, really makes no sense. And for those of you that are in doubt, I encourage you to walk over Embarcadero on Alma's sidewalk and see what it feels like to walk next to 50-mile-an-hour cars with 0 or no barrier. So this proposal aims to eliminate the median and trees from many blocks, which is going to be serious for pedestrian safety. There's a lot of folks and a lot of students that use the Alma sidewalk to get to Town and Country and also get to Palo Alto High School because most of the classes are actually down near Embarcadero. And finally, the Churchill proposal would destroy the residential area around Churchill. So eliminating trees, moving power lines, eliminating minimum setbacks for most of the houses on Alma, and running this 5th lane of 50-mile-an-hour traffic right through existing yards and way too close to homes. So thanks for considering the safety of our children and the lives of the residents in the area. I appreciate your time. Have a good rest of the day. Thanks.
That concludes public comment.
Thank you. So at this time, we will table item 1 until later in the meeting and go forward with discussion of item 2, because as we said before, we think it'll help inform the subsequent discussion of item 1. So item 2 is a review of the additional analysis to evaluate the merits of the Kellogg Avenue and Seal Avenue bicycle and ped crossings. and to discuss next steps in providing a recommendation from the Rail Committee to the council for a bike and pedestrian crossing associated with the Churchill underpass. So Philip, did you have a presentation?
Yeah.
Well, not until after we have our presentation. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. Just a brief presentation. Sorry, I'm trying to pull up the staff report here just so I can get on the right page here. But at any rate, do that after. So the item that we have here, and thank you for hearing this item, is reviewing the potential crossing locations for the Churchill partial underpass, as we call it. And the locations that were reviewed were both Kellogg Avenue and Seal Avenue. Okay, please go ahead to the next slide. The bicycle and pedestrian transportation plan analyzed these two locations based on really the 5 criteria that you see on the screen, and I could go into a little bit of depth on each one of those, but I'm just going to give you the overall results of the technical memorandum. Really, it said that, or found that the Seal Avenue crossings supported by prior plans and analyses would fill a longer gap between alternative crossing locations, appears to have adequate space for a landing location, and would increase connectivity to the transportation network. It's also been identified as a potential alignment for a grade-separated rail crossing in the public involvement efforts, including the XCAP, and also in the 2012 Bicycle and Pedestrian Transportation Plan. Next slide, please. These are the, I'll say proposed layouts, but really just to note that on the left, we have Kellogg Avenue, which you see in the kind of the box, there's spatial constraints, if you will, of the Palo Alto Vikings, Palo Alto High School Vikings stadium. And
Philip, do we have a full-size image of this so that people can really see that? Is there one that we can pull up on each of them? Yeah, I think that'd be helpful. Thanks. We'll do that while
is that? Thank you. Yeah, so you can see the detail. Think that's perfect. I think can everybody see that? Hopefully. So that area where it says see detail A on this sheet, but the area that's in the box there, really that's where it would, the tunnel under Kellogg, under Alma from Kellogg would exit to the bike path there. And that's where the spatial constraints are for the Kellogg Avenue. And if you can move over to the Piers Park, and just to note, this is really conceptual. That's not necessarily how it would exit. It's just a concept at this time. But there's room for it to do different things in this area, noting that right now there's a dog park there. So things would need to be adjusted in that area. Potentially the dog park would need to move or shift or be reallocated to a different part of the park, and you'd want a path out of there. So you'd want that to connect somehow to a pathway, either through the park or around the park. Also want to note that having the undercrossing at Seal would reduce or remove a barrier for people that are trying to go to a park, and Safe Routes to Park does note that, just a walking distance does create a barrier to the park. So this potentially could induce demand to the park. Thank you. And next slide, please. These are just renderings for the current Kellogg Avenue alternative, noting that the top right rendering, which unfortunately has my face on top of it, at least on that screen, that's really basically what the Seal Avenue entry would look very similar to. So you'd have traffic limited to one-way directional with a tunnel potentially in the middle of the street. Very similar geometry for both Kellogg and Seal. And Next slide, please. And then finally, just to talk about next steps, we intend to do some targeted outreach to all of the areas that would be, potentially affected by this project. So talking about like mailers to those in affected areas, citywide messaging. We're planning to do that both ahead of our community meeting that we're planning for next month and ahead of the potential discussion at City Council in June. And then obviously the action potentially before you on this item is for Rail Committee to provide a recommendation to the City Council for advancement of the partial underpass with the preferred bike and ped crossing location. So with that, I'm happy to take any questions.
Great. Why don't we hear from members of the public next?
Our first speaker is Yoichiro T. Take a seat right there, please, sir.
And then you can.
And push the button to turn your mic on.
Thanks. I assume I should wait for your timer to come up.
Yes, please. Thank you so much. Whenever you're ready, sir.
Sure. My name is Yoichiro Taku. I live on the 100 block of Kellogg. I've been a Palo Alto resident for over 25 years. I've watched and observed the city council meetings and the XCAP process. So I thank everyone for all of their efforts in all of this. To level set on Kellogg versus Seal, I just want to remind everyone that the partial underpass was created as a result of community involvement going, we don't like Kellogg being closed, we want something else. In the process of coming up with the underpass, the situation was, well, geez, like bike and peds can't cross. We need a tunnel somewhere. And the result was, well, Kellogg is somewhere close. Let's stick a tunnel there. There has not been any study of Kellogg versus anywhere else until this Kittleson memo. So I just want to point out that the fact that Kellogg is even on the table was simply a misinformed decision simply because it happened to be a convenient place very close to Kellogg in the first place. With regard to Kellogg versus Seal, there's some issues with the Kittleson memo that aren't really addressed at all. So earlier speaker had mentioned Castellea traffic. So please keep in mind that there are, I don't know, a couple hundred bicycles that go through to Pali High School every day over the Churchill crossing. You add those bikers to Castellea drop-off traffic, run them through Kellogg, that's probably a really bad idea. Second issue that's not addressed in the Kittleson memo are things like how wide is Seal? How wide is Kellogg? If you stick a tunnel right in front of my house, I lose my on-street parking. I'll be very annoyed about that. And for separate eminent domain reasons, there'll probably be lawsuits with regard to the bits that need to be taken for partial underpass, I would just kind of point out. There are multiple flag lots on both. I will tell you, there are 4 flag lots on Kellogg, and they're going to be extremely affected by putting a tunnel in the middle of Kellogg because you will lose parking on, I think, about 2/3 of that block. I can't comment on Seal, but for fairness, I'll point out that there are flag lots over there. With regard to kind of general issues on the underpass, I just want to point out that 6 members of XCAP voted for closure, and it was only a result of political pressure during a meeting the decision was to go forward and look at partial underpass again. Now, I think that there's probably at least 5 or 6 people on the 100 block of Kellogg that are represented here, because we certainly don't want a tunnel in front of our house, but kind of more generally, I think that the staff's outreach to the community, it really depends on who's shouting the loudest as to what gets done. I just kind of point out, generally speaking, the property takings issue is a serious problem with the underpass. I can't comment on the other corners though.
Our next speaker is Eric Nordman.
Good afternoon. Seal is a clear choice over Kellogg. It is midway between other bike ped crossings, while Kellogg is a few blocks south of Embarcadero. It's feasible, while the Kellogg has issues associated with the Caltrans study. It's critical to start design for Seal and the Matadero Creek bike ped crossings so that these crossings can be completed before the existing crossings are disrupted by construction. I would like to also mention that the Seal crossing could potentially be cheaper than a Kellogg one. Because it doesn't have the T intersection, it could probably use a smaller, narrower tunnel. 20 feet was chosen for Homer because it's a T intersection, but Seal would be a straight shot. Thank you.
Our next speaker is Steve Rosenblum. You should be unmuted. Steve, if you're speaking, we unfortunately cannot hear you. It appears he might be having technical difficulties.
Okay, if he comes back, we'll see if we can accommodate giving him an opportunity to speak later. All right, so Philip, in your summary, we really and the report really gave a strong case for why Seal is a preferred location. One of the things we had been asking about previously that was kind of alluded to by some of the speakers is really the safe routes to school, particularly Pali. What's the essentially the heat map of folks who are riding and walking to Pali from that area, and how many would be served by Kellogg versus Seal? My understanding is we were attempting to get some information from PAUSD. Did we ever get anything meaningful?
We did, but I guess the challenge is that changes on a year-to-year basis. And so that's why we actually looked at the school catchment area as a better basis for where students could come from. And that's the last map there. So that's the last map in the technical report is the school catchment area, which kind of just shows that
Can we go ahead
essentially
and get that on the?
Yes.
No, it's not in the.
It's page 8 of the it's not in the PowerPoint presentation.
Maybe we can go ahead and get that on the that image up there.
No, that is sorry, it's the last page. It's 8 of 8 on the that technical. That's it. Yes.
And if we can blow that up a little bit.
That might be as
Okay. There we go. But out of what we got from the district, I know it changes from year to year, but it's still a value. Do we have that data?
So we did receive 2022 data. We did receive that. kind of just it didn't give us much information. It's dots on a map. It wasn't numbers. It didn't help us to quantify like people coming from,
And the
you know,
dots
that
weren't
would-
individual origins?
yeah,
No.
the problem is that it's a PDF like type map. So it was kind of hard to pull something from it.
It's
And we felt,
it's purposely vague because it's students and they don't want to mark where the students live. So it's
see.
kind of a large dot. And so it ended up not being particularly useful.
Okay, so I think the best way that we can at a high level analyze it is looking at if you're a student coming from different directions east of Alma, from all the way from the north edge of Palo Alto down to the southern boundary of the Pali district. How would you get to Pali, and what subset of those students might choose to go Kellogg versus Seal? And as somebody who rides that route routinely and sees students who take basically Melville and Kingsley to go under the underpass at Embarcadero, and see students who go to Churchill itself or to California Avenue. Those are the various options that they have in that district. And it's a pretty narrow group who would choose Kellogg, is my conclusion as best I can. So I just kind of wanted to put that aspect out on the table. Let me go back now to colleagues for questions. Yeah, Ed?
Yeah, I had a couple questions for clarification on packet page 11. That I think is what you might have read from originally. So the analysis found that the bike and ped crossing at Seal would fill a longer gap between alternatives, would increase connectivity and go to the park. But then further down it said bicycles and peds and bicycles would no longer be able to cross the track at Churchill. And would need to go to either Seal or Embarcadero. And because we would intentionally make that happen, right?
sorry, I'm trying to follow along with you, and
Second
unfortunately I'm
paragraph.
struggling.
Second paragraph.
Yeah, when you say packet, that's the hard copy, but what's the page number of that item?
Packet report, page 2.
Yeah. Okay. Ed, whereabouts on it?
On item 2.
Thank you.
Okay. So second paragraph, that's what you
Second.
read from at the beginning.
I actually read from the technical memorandum. Is that what you're referring to?
Well, that's probably where the sentence came from, but it's basically saying that Seal is better for these reasons, and the sort of unfortunately, or the however, is that peds and bikes would no longer be able to cross Churchill by intent.
Yeah.
That's what you're saying?
So technically, bicycles would be able to utilize it as a vehicular cyclist. However, students would,
No, sorry to correct you, but it's a partial underpass. So only on the east side could bikes and peds go north or south on
Yes.
Alma, or bikes go
They
north or
wouldn't-
south on Alma. but
they wouldn't
couldn't
be able
go
to
through.
cross on, so they would not be able to cross on Churchill, but they would be able to enter from Alma and go down into the underpass and act as a vehicle. There would not be a bicycle infrastructure. They would be able to act as a vehicle, but they would not be able to, because of the partial underpass as it's designed, they would not be able to cross. So the current movement that happens straight across Churchill would not exist.
Okay.
Yeah, it wouldn't exist for cars or bikes.
Yes.
Yeah. That's what I'm saying is that's basically intentional. Or
Yes.
Or it's
well, it's necessary for the design.
yeah. And or else it's a residual outcome of the design of the partial. But in the study as well, it said that they felt that Churchill was a high stress location for both peds and bicycles, which would again argue in favor of Kellogg, as I understand it. Is that correct?
Kellogg, not Seal.
I'm sorry, Seal and keeping them from going on to Churchill. Right. Thank you for the correction. Is that correct? That they're basically saying it would be better if they weren't crossing Churchill under any circumstance?
Well, so Churchill right now, you have to cross, multiple lanes of traffic, then you've got a train crossings and noting that because there's the barrier there becomes a lot of bunching.
Right.
Not just the vehicles, not just the bikes and the pedestrians, but the vehicles as well. So yeah, it is.
It's slammed every time I go
yes.
by there during school hours.
Yeah.
And I mean, long school hours, not just for 30 minutes. So, on the one hand, I was thinking that people are used to doing that and you disrupt their patterns, not discounting the fact that you lose 1 year of kids every year and you get new kids, but that behavior pattern shifting is going to be safer, based on this issue, which is that it's all stressful.
Well, and I'll just add, as somebody who witnesses this frequently, there's an intuitive behavior pattern of those students, particularly ones who are coming eastbound, which is to ride on the wrong side of the street after they'll stay on the, I'll call it north side of Churchill. It's not really crossing Alma, and then figure out what point in time they will cut across the street in front of cars to the south side of the street. It's really hazardous. It's scary hazardous today.
Some also ride in a flank of 3 going down the street.
Yeah, there are all kinds of patterns that they've developed on their own.
Yeah,
and it seems like every year, whether they're passing it down from one generation to another, or they just figure out the same thing. I can't quite determine, but they do the same thing every year.
And is your reference to on that same page right underneath that this is a right of way issue? It's because it's the school right of way. If we were sort of exiting onto the school grounds.
Yeah, so it's the spatial issue there is the school football stadium and the space that we have on the path, the existing bike path there. So and also and the Caltrain right of way as well. So it's all very tight there.
So the right of way, as I understood this from the writing, you barely have enough room to exit. You really would want more, but you're already in the right of way of the school.
Yes, with the pathway that we had, redesigned in order to make sure that it was, with input that we received from the Pedestrian and Bicycle Advisory Committee and that we reviewed here at this committee, we redesigned the pathway in order to better accommodate bicyclists not exiting right into the pathway of bikes and peds that might already be traveling on that, and then. That was when we encountered the issues of really encroaching into the school right away.
And we also discussed in a previous meeting, we might have to give up the bleachers on that side of the field.
Yeah, that's the spatial constraint that we're talking about.
So we're leaving in this spatial constraint, we're leaving the bleachers, which doesn't give us much room. That's
no,
what you're saying.
No.
Oh,
no. So the plans that the concept that we're talking about right now is the one that would impact the football bleachers potentially.
Who needs a visitors team, right? It could help the spirit.
Anyway.
It could help the spirit a lot.
Well, and what I realized too is Julie and Ed were not part of the committee when we had this come forward and had the very strong pushback from PAUSD. So maybe it would be helpful to just refresh everybody on their response.
Yeah, well, I guess I'll just say that obviously they would be unhappy if we were to impact their stadium. So I think that's probably
a good concise review.
More.
My last question is on the other one. My last comment is that it wouldn't be universally loved, but I actually think this could be a net plus that is exiting in Piers Park for the reasons that you mentioned, just in terms of the access. You're riding a bike or walking in a park. That's a good thing. So I think that could be worked around with our great designer of our parks here in terms of a rehab. The dog park is absolutely essential. But with a little bit of design, I think that could actually turn into a plus. Okay, thanks.
Yeah, Nadia?
I was just going to point out two things. So one is for Councilmember Lowing, the original concept versus how it's now impacted by Caltrain's right-of-way incursions is part of what's pushing it towards the bleachers. So we didn't originally touch the bleachers. That's as a result of Caltrain's update. I will say part two is one of the benefits of SEAL coming up in the park is that any bicycle pedestrian paths are considered a park improvement. So they don't require going to the voters as if we were taking parkland. It's actually seen as an improvement, different from the Quarry Road situation that you guys are going to be facing with something else. So
Thanks.
And I'll just add, following up on a point Philip made, which is that this is not, if it was in Seal, it would not only be a safe route for biking for Pali students, but for the broader community to connect to the Park Boulevard path in a very safe way. And then and really providing access to Pierce Park for Old Palo Alto. And Old Palo Alto has limited park space. They have Bowdoin Park in the corner. But for the northern half of Old Palo Alto, this would really suddenly connect Pierce Park, make it their park as well as Evergreen and Southgate's park. So that's a real plus. I just on, if we can pull back up the map that showed and enlarge the entrance in this Seal. And I know Philip said what I'll call is the dog leg to the left as you're going westbound there that's shown. If you could blow up that square of the right frame. I had assumed that, we'd dogleg to the right and go behind the tennis courts and the basketball courts. And then it actually would probably connect onto Castellea, which is a less busy street and that much closer to Pali. But Castellea there is essentially what loops into Park Boulevard, but very tentatively. But I just want to put that out there as my assumption is that would be the preferred ramp. Yeah.
And I actually, and of course, this is all really conceptual, but I actually had a thought that maybe a pathway going in both directions there, connecting to the Park Boulevard. And then there's a little, I want to say it's like a maintenance road at the bottom there. If it could connect there through
That's
north
right.
and south, maybe would be best. And I also want to note that there is some room potentially so that the dog park space is not lost. You know, if you go over there and walk at the park, just north of where, if we're calling it north of where the dog park is currently, there's not really much of anything in that space currently.
Yeah, so as Philip was saying, it doesn't show up on the map very well, but at the bottom of the screen, there is a roadway that cuts along I'll call it the southern edge of Pierce Park, and it goes to a little utility shed of some sort. I can't remember what its function is, but that basically would skirt outside of the usable park as well. So a couple of good possibilities there that we don't have to resolve today. In that case,
I do have a question.
yeah, sorry.
I am struck by the public comment against Kellogg as the proper location and the lack of comment raising concerns about Seal. And it makes me wonder, are we confident, for somebody who is new to the Rail Committee, have we typically had a balance of concerns about Seal and Kellogg in terms of in terms of resident opinion? And also for the people accustomed to Pierce Park as their neighborhood park, to what extent are they aware of this funnel potential of all of these Pali students coming to a park that they use for other purposes?
Yeah, I don't recall any specific, I would say, unbalanced concern from the different locations. So I'd say that we did hear concerns and we heard support for both locations as they were initially discussed. I don't know, Nadia, if you remember much during the XCAP discussions, but I think I think we will potentially get more feedback as we send out targeted mailers to those that would be, within the affected areas. As some, as we heard from the residents, at Kellogg, we're likely to hear very similar comments from those at Seal. The geometry is very, very similar to those locations. So if you're losing parking in front of your house because there's a bike ped tunnel at Kellogg, it's the same situation at Seal.
With regards to the previous public process, when XCAP looked at this, the majority of XCAP voted for the closure. So even though the minority had voted for this alternative, among the minority, we did have everyone supporting Seal over Kellogg. But since that didn't move forward as an alternative, we didn't make it that far. Now that there has to be further review, I mean, certainly we're all trying to draw lines on a map right now in our head. I mean, this is why we need to go to further engineering, because I'm sure there's a lot more complicated things to it. But I will say that it does need to have more community outreach. We can always use community outreach. I do see one flag lot that was, we had a member of the public raise the Kellogg flag lots. There does seem to be one at that corner. I will point out that the difference between Kellogg and Seal along the corners along Alma is that on the northeast corner of Seal, we actually, I believe it's an RM, they're apartments, it's like an RM30 property, different than the R1 properties are on the corner of Kellogg. And so that was something that was considered a potential opportunity as well, or something to consider. But again, all this would have to go to further engineering, and now seems impacted by Caltrain's technical review explaining that basically we don't have space at Kellogg whether we wanted it or not. And so it now appears that Seal, if you chose the partial underpass, would be the only alternative you would have in terms of space.
My related question, thank you for that, is coming from my vantage point as someone who lives near Gunn and is on the equivalent of kind of Mariposa or Castellea on the Gunn side, the bikes streaming down. I'm aware of that river of traffic in the morning, and wonder the extent to which the Southgate community is on board with this rerouting of all of these Pally bikes through their residential neighborhood.
I'm sorry, I missed that question. I was trying to pull up something that was getting
I'm looking at the flow. Let's say we go Seal, and then we've got Pally bikes now coming from Seal underpass through Piers Park, and then onto Castellet or Mariposa to get to their high school. I'm just wondering about what we know of any potential concerns from residents of that neighborhood regarding the redirection of a substantial amount of bicycle high school traffic.
Yeah, well, I will say that is already an existing that's an existing and probably one of our highest use bicycle boulevards through there. So I will say that, yeah.
I did not realize that. Thank you.
Yeah, so I think that, yes, you're correct. There will be more bicycles that are diverted through there. Also, just noting that because there'd be less bunching, it would be potentially, yeah, more of a flow during the same time period that they're probably used to a flow of bicycles through their neighborhood.
I will say those are good points, that there will be an increase, and that there, over the last couple years, there had been, to my frustration and others, that the primary focus had been on the Kellogg location for some kind of historic reasons, even though it seemed obvious that that was not going to be the preferred location. But as a result, I don't think the public is really attuned to the residents on Seal and the residents in Southgate who might have concerns on that. I think we are going to have that outreach, and we should anticipate that there will be some concerns raised, even if we believe that it looks overwhelmingly to be the better location. Okay. So what we can do at this time is make a recommendation to the council. And prospect is that we would recommend that that seal be the, our recommendation for the bike ped connection for the Churchill partial underpass.
Second.
Okay. And any other discussion? All right. We can have a roll call vote.
Councilmember Lithcott-Hames,
Yes.
Chair Burt,
Yes.
Councilmember Lowing.
Yes.
Motion carries.
Thank you. So that concludes item 2, and we now go back to item 1. Wish they were all that easy. All right, so we need to think about how we want to frame our discussion on item 1 because it's more complex and multifaceted. So first, why don't we do a round of questions? We had questions last time, but colleagues may have additional follow-up questions at this time. So are there any? Julie, do you have some?
Sure, thank you. I was intrigued last time by the conversation about viaduct having been sort of brought back onto the table. Caltrain investigated the option further in accordance with the city's directive that we were interested in avoiding a shoe fly as a matter of saving money. And viaduct, therefore, potentially being a cheaper alternative if the existing track could be used as shoe fly. But as Caltrain evaluated it, they realized in really diving into the how it would be done, they realized that with electrification requiring a 25-foot buffer, so if the existing became the shoe fly, need 25 feet from that, the viaduct would have to be built over Alma and the approach structures would permanently encroach into 2 lanes of Alma, which feels untenable given that it's a major artery north-south in our city. What we then learned was that the viaduct project could actually be flipped. And I was really intrigued when Rob mentioned this. That is, instead of the existing tracks being the shoe fly and the viaduct being built out to the east, if you will, flip it, the viaduct goes more to the west, closer to the residences. And the shoe fly would become a temporary shoe fly going into Alma about 6 feet, as I understand it, and then not permanent. And I'm deeply intrigued by this possibility and wonder if there's anything more you can say to help, the broader group of us here and those listening understand this potential of the flip, which I realize has not been, you were not asked to study it. And so it's merely in the analysis of the problem of the viaduct encroaching so far into Alma that you've appreciated the flip might work. So wondering if Caltrain staff is able to say anything further about the feasibility or merits of that approach to viaduct.
Sure. Michael Rabinowitz with Caltrain. So I think the only thing we can say for sure at this phase, we know that if you did that, the viaduct would be closer to the private property side of it. That we basically, there's very little that can be guaranteed about what that would look like. It can be reviewed extensively in PE. But I don't want to send, Caltrain, we don't want to send the idea of like where exactly the shoe flies would be and how much they would encroach or not encroach. That would all have to be determined. So if you do proceed with this alternative, there's less known about that possibly, but it definitely can be explored thoroughly in preliminary engineering.
Is there any sense that the shoe fly encroachment would be larger than that with a hybrid, let's say?
I think can't say for sure right now, is the short answer. Just because you would have to, it would be a pretty dramatic re-envisioning of the city's current vision of it.
My understanding is that what you looked at would have been a like 19.5 foot encroachment into Alma, which basically would take up 2 lanes, but that this flip would be more of a 6.5 foot encroachment. This is what I've learned from Rob in my pre-conversations and trying to get up to speed on the various alternatives.
I think that that's that could be an initial estimate, but that doesn't mean it couldn't be more or less. It just hasn't been reviewed more than very cursorily. I'll ask Edgar, who's on the phone, if there's anything more that can be said about that with any more specificity. But if not, that would have to be learned for sure later.
Council member, let me go on video. This would be very similar to hybrid. However, again, it does need to be evaluated in more detail as part of preliminary engineering if the city so chooses to advance the alternative. The key element to understand is that if a shoe fly is to go towards Alma, the constraining limit is the center line of what's known as MT1, the existing track. So that's where the existing OCS is, and therefore, or the catenary, and therefore it would be offset from that line towards Alma. There could be other ways to be able to evaluate it during preliminary engineering in terms of construction methods or sequencing, but that would be the approximation today, given the information on hand.
Thank you. I know last time around, we were also told that if we went with the viaduct option as analyzed by Caltrain, that Caltrain higher ups, I believe Rob said this is above my pay grade. Someone higher than Rob had said we would want to keep the that existing what had become the shoe fly track. If we flipped, would presumably that existing shoe fly track, which would be created for the engineering project, would not be maintained. So we would not have that impediment going forward. Is that correct?
So anything that I think the one thing we can say for sure is anything that does encroach onto Alma, we're not gonna that's not gonna be permanent. The other aspect would need to be studied in further because there would be 2 shoe fly tracks, but it would be reviewed in preliminary engineering. Like I said last time, the idea is to show the full scope of what could happen, but that can be reviewed and refined further and could potentially be amended.
Thank you. It's probably obvious, but I'm interested in this analysis because of the concerns we are hearing about taking of property with the other options, with the underpass option, the utilities impacts anytime we go down, the traffic rerouting impacts of what I call the lasso and the belt buckle of the Charleston and the East Meadow, and the bike ped impacts. So I'm deeply I know there's a frustration out there in why is this being considered again? My understanding, as I have attempted to come sufficiently up to speed on this subject, is the sense that perhaps the complexity of viaduct, the possibility of viaduct was not sufficiently studied, not blaming anybody, but there's a tremendous sense of the problem that it brings, and the ugliness, the noise, and so on. And yet, leaving those issues aside for a moment, it seems to be in many ways a path of least resistance in terms of these other impacts, particularly around property, which is why I'm interested in understanding this flip possibility further. No further questions for me right now. Thank you.
Ed?
Yeah, I have a few. One was actually in that regard. Adrian Brandt said that felt that Caltrain was actually sandbagging that alternative. And so I don't know if you want to say more than you did on that, but the issue was, why do you need all those tracks and why do you need so much space to begin with? If you want to comment on that, you can.
I think we said a fair amount of it at the last meeting, but we can repeat that kind of what was just asked. It would be reviewed further in PE and there's potential for amending on that. I think that it stems from a desire from the railroad to fully actualize the utility of its right of way. But, you know, we keep saying we want to be good partners, and that's something that we are trying to be conscious of and will take into review when it, if progress to preliminary engineering.
Okay. Since the X gap, the biggest issue with that has been the visual. The people don't want to look out their house and see a train. They want to see the sky or a neighbor or something. That ain't going to go away. That's really embedded in a lot of the neighbors that be impacted. So that's out there, and I really respect that. I have a couple questions on Meadow and Charleston, and let me frame it this way. I'd like to kind of know the differences between Meadow and Charleston, is sort of if they both have to be done, because as I think through this and hear various options and look at the amount of time and money and construction and so on, well, I don't know if recently, I know it's been briefly discussed, but maybe we should be doing 2 out of these 3 of the Charleston and Kellogg, I'm sorry, Churchill and Meadow. If we did that for those reasons, which one would be the one that we wouldn't do at this point? And part of that is, you know, and I'm raising this for the public and for myself and for Julie, who's also new. I'm only a year at this compared to some of you who've been in years and years at this. But raise the issue of, you know, do we need to do all 3? And Meadow and Charleston are closer to each other. So instantly, intuitively, you say, well, maybe one of those could happen, could take care of it. If it was that simple, you would have already done it. But is there any way that you could envision, you know, doing only 2? And would that by definition not be Meadow and Charleston because of the traffic flow that you're trying to fix there?
So I just want to make sure I understand. You're talking about the 3 locations, not the 3 alternatives. Just want to note, I think that it's very unlikely that we construct all 3 at the same time, even if we had our project today figured out, because we're going to have to line up all the funding. So I think that's really unrealistic. But the reality is,
I wasn't assuming that.
But the reality is, the reason for this project and the process that we've, you know, set out on determining, you know, a grade crossing is to eliminate the future traffic congestion that will be caused by additional trains,
right,
and more frequent trains. So yeah, we could grade separate one of these crossings and we get a benefit there, but there's still going to be congestion and issues and incidents, frankly, that occur at the other crossings that are not grade separated. So that's why the goal ultimately for this project and process has been to grade separate all of the locations.
Could you go a little bit deeper on the Meadow and Charleston? If you're doing those, do you want to do those together? Is it sort of?
Yeah, I think it depends on, you know, the alternative potentially, but yeah, likely you do because of their proximity. Likely it's helpful to do them at least in some sort of phasing.
They have
together.
to be. They're too close together. They have to be done at the same time. We did that, though the traffic analysis is a different thing. I'm saying literally if you lift the track in one spot, you have to lift it in the other one because they're too close together. So we did look at, there was traffic analysis done starting in 2013. It's been asked multiple times about whether it was possible to close Meadow and divert everybody onto Charleston and then just try to Charleston. But it would overflow more than 50% of the traffic, which would basically break the traffic network. So there's kind of 2 parts to that. We couldn't close Meadow at all. And what you do to one, you must do to the other because they're too close in proximity. So you can't actually just pick one or the other.
Sorry, based on the current alternatives that are under analysis, that you cannot, yeah. So based on the current alternatives.
Does that mean there are alternatives that we haven't talked about? That
there were something like, what was it, 40?
No, that there's no alternative.
Alternatives, yeah.
I don't think there's any alternative in which you could separate the 2.
Yeah.
And that goes into why that has been treated as, is it mega project, we describe it? Yeah. And essentially as one project, Charleston and Meadow, for those reasons, because both from a constructability standpoint and the traffic impacts. It's kind of both of them or none of them.
Okay.
Yeah, I'd like to add that, yeah, one thing like you've all clarified that the traffic volumes on both of them are sufficient to justify their own crossing. If one of them was to be closed, then the other will not be able to handle additional traffic volumes, and therefore both would be needed to ensure that there is traffic circulation in that area. Second thing regarding having both the projects being done simultaneously, there are some constructability challenges and issues that like Chair Burt mentioned, but also we may have to look at from the perspective of the traffic during construction and how to manage the traffic operations during the construction, and also diverting traffic during and after construction. So they both kind of work hand in hand and need to be together.
Yeah. Yeah, I didn't know what had happened in traffic in the last 13 years. So I guess it's only gotten worse, which is the easy guess. One of the things that you wanted us to look at today is alternatives to look at various kinds of studies. And my understanding right now is that in this stage, which is early, but in this stage, that in both Meadow and Charleston, there are no right now. I'm saying this to be true or false because it's an important issue for the public, that there are no full houses that are planned to be taken down. I mean, that could happen if we have to design it that way, or it could be a constraint that we put into the formula here that we don't want that to happen. But what you had in the staff report in in February, which I pulled back out, is that there's some partial taking of a bit of yards on about 25 houses in Charleston and Meadow. Yeah, here we go.
Yeah, council member, we do have some full takes on Charleston Road crossing. There are two at the roundabout, and there's one at the corner, northeast corner also. And they are shown probably in the fact sheets and other locations, but they're also identified in the matrix that was provided at the last meeting.
And at Meadow as well.
Correct, and at Meadow
Yeah.
also.
And I'll just note one of the areas that had been discussed in the greater roundabout location is that whether 2 lanes are needed for that roundabout. And AECom had believed that there were 2 lanes needed. This is an area that we may want to have additional study on ways that can mitigate that. Because it would reduce the property impacts if that could be accommodated.
That was exactly the next thing I was going to just mention, is that in the February 20th report, it listed 12 in Meadow and 28 in Charleston that would be, quote, directly impacted. And with the square footage, which is relatively de minimis square footage, but it's not de minimis to the person who's losing it. Don't misunderstand me. I thought that meant that there weren't any hard takes right now, but I know we're just looking at preliminary plans and we're not really there yet. But it seems to me that we should do a couple of analyses here just to make sure, if we would have to do that, which I hope we don't, why that's essential. And so I think we should do a model here that shows no takings and see how we have to design around that, whether that's odd traffic patterns or something like that. But secondly is the other one about this the roundabout that Julie mentions as well, where you have to go right to get left and then do a circle and then come back. That may work, but if there's any other creative way around that, obviously we'd like to think about it. And I respect the fact that you all looked at that before. But relative to what the public wants to hear as we get close to making a decision, those would be a couple of things to, I think, have a look at as alternatives. That is all my questions.
Yeah, I was going to say, like, with regards to the roundabout, we did model the traffic volumes and look at all the diverted traffic that will be going through the roundabout. And a simple intersection will not be able to handle it. The queuing and the intersection functioning will not be, will be significant congestion, and therefore would not be able to work without the roundabout. So that's one of the reasons the roundabout was recommended at that location. And so
Yeah, imagine so.
and also I'd like to add with regards to the previous question regarding if the two locations can be built separately, the partial underpass does have the ability to be built separately. So and so that's one of the reasons we could also rather than having a combined project as one mega project, we could look for funding in different years and or different for Meadow Charleston. Sorry, underpass. Underpass options can be done separately for the Meadow and Charleston. Yes.
I appreciate Councilmember Lowing's questions and sort of pushing back on the harder parts of this, like, are there really going to be full takings? And, you know, does the roundabout really have, is that really the best solution? And I think for the two of us coming into the conversation, you know, later in the game, we naturally have these questions. And I'm sure neither of us is trying to second guess the great amount of work that has gone into this at the level of experts and council and the committee and the public. You know, at the same time, when you're confronting this anew, you're like, wait a minute, this can't possibly be the best. I'm in that same space of really trying to respect the analysis that has happened to date and yet bring my brain to it as well and try to, you know, be a part of figuring out what's next. So can you clarify, you mentioned that I think 12 Meadow and 28 Charleston were impacted. I don't know if I recorded those numbers accurately. Okay. Ripon, could you let us know how many actual takings are?
Can I just say, we're using the term takings, but almost invariably they're acquisitions.
Okay.
And negotiated acquisitions.
Yeah.
And it's
Fair.
very rare that
Fair.
there's actually.
Thank you for that clarification. How many negotiated acquisitions do we anticipate associated with Meadow and with Charleston?
Sorry again. There's a summary on our matrix of evaluation that was presented at the February Rail Committee meeting. And it lists like 5 full property acquisitions are required in multiple locations, 2 at Meadow and 3 at Charleston Road. For partial at Meadow Drive, 6 front yard acquisitions, 1 side yard, 5 backyard acquisitions. And for Charleston, there's 7 front yard acquisitions, 5 on the south side of the Charleston and 2 on the north side of Charleston, and 1 side yard, 8 property acquisitions on both sides of Charleston between Alma and Wright Place, 6 backyard, which are 6 backyard and 2 front yard, and then also 6 backyard acquisitions on the north side of Charleston between Wright Place and Mumford Place, and 6 property acquisitions along Alma Street between Charleston and Eli Place.
Thank you. Yes.
Can I ask a clarification from Ripon? I think if I remember correctly, one of those acquisitions is a small apartment complex, a 14 unit on the corner of, that's the Meadow one, right? On the, I'll call it the northeast corner of Meadow. And
So
that.
one of the 2 Meadows you're saying is an apartment complex?
Correct. Yes. And in the end, post-construction, most of that property would not be utilized and could then be reconstructed at that location, potentially a higher density. Is that right?
If I could clarify about that. So what happens is the access to that apartment complex as it exists today marks it as an acquisition at this really, really early stage of engineering. But as we get to the next level, it's possible that you figure out another way to have an access point, which means it might be removed from the list of what is right now very preliminary put as a property acquisition. I will also note that a lot of the partial acquisitions are impacted by the current very wide bike lanes that we have, which are 20 feet bike lanes, I believe it is, which is larger than a normal bike lane. And there was a lot of discussion about how that could be refined. So
Very helpful addition. Thank you.
if I could add one more thing for clarification for both the committee and the public. XCAP obviously spent a lot of time looking at, how do you build these alternatives without impacting any Palo Alto as much as we could. And ultimately, what we were tasked with was, we have a transportation project that is going to be good for the area. How do we also make it good for everything else that needs to get built? And what we saw in the traffic analysis was, whether it's a hybrid or a viaduct or even the trench, which we haven't talked about, all of the traffic movements today, Meadow and Charleston, as intersections, are rated as A through F, F being the worst. Right now, Meadow and Charleston are Fs. When we did our traffic analysis after looking at the trench and the viaduct and the hybrid, all those intersections remain an F. So they get a slightly better F, but you don't get any better than an F. And from the XCAP's perspective, it seemed like a tremendous waste of money to go through all this stuff and end up with intersections that still stink. So that was part of the reason for the underpass conversations, and why we made the trade-offs that we made in terms of really looking at, well, you are impacting certain Palo Altans, and we spent a lot of time researching the laws that are involved with people whose homes are acquired and what tax benefit they could get. And we had all sorts of meetings. It's all on the Connecting Palo Alto website. But as policymakers now, you're faced with, do we build something that doesn't impact everybody else, but then leaves us with basically the same traffic level in intersections, or has an F? Or do we build something that actually makes it safer because you've fully separated for bikes and pedestrians? And that was the big thing about the underpass. We knew we were sacrificing some things, but actually making the intersections, and the traffic study has it, but I think you get mostly Bs. There's a couple of Cs and Ds and Es, but not Fs. And that was the biggest driving factor for XCAP making the really difficult decision to talk about having to impact our fellow Palo Altans homes.
That's helpful. Thank you so much for that. We heard a public commenter talk about the cost. Her concern that the negotiated acquisition would not fully compensate her. And I've never approached this subject before in an analytical way. And I would love to be pointed in the direction of there's something you just referenced, a website that talks about tax benefits or ways in which this becomes how do we make our community residents whose homes are taken, small in number, but huge impact for that family, how do we make them whole? Just the capital gains or whatever it is that, they accrue by having this purchase, the tax hit right off the bat is enormous. And can they really afford to buy again, or, live in Palo Alto still? I would hope that it would be true that, yes, we will work toward a negotiated acquisition that, continues to welcome these folks into the Palo Alto community. Councilmember Lowing made a point, people don't want to look up and see a train. And you said, I really respect that. And you said, that's not going to go away. And my take on that is, people were not given, a presentation on what VITA could look like. We saw the renderings or drawings, pictures I've seen are not terribly attractive. Looks like sort of a low level Disneyland. Like if Disneyland is, an A level, we got more of like a cheap Disneyland version of a monorail kind of situation. And it is the case that beautiful structures, beautiful and functional structures can be built with public funds. We just have to make the case for it. And, in contrast, I feel our community was shown plain and unattractive possibilities instead of, what could be called a work of art going through the city. And if it was attractive, if it was beautiful as well as functional, I'm not sure that people would be concerned about looking up and seeing a train. They might be delighted that there's a modern alternative, relatively noiseless, that they don't have to think about. And the train travels at the speed of a train, and humans get to interact at ground level, on foot, on bicycle, with dogs, with cars, on a plane that is a more human scale. And it's because I think the visual and the noise impacts were not presented in a way that was appealing, that I think this issue is back before us. And because it doesn't come with your F grade intersection is probably the most compelling thing for me now, as a concern for Viaduct and the others. But I remain deeply concerned about the takings. I'm sorry, the negotiated acquisitions and.
They're acquisitions. So it can be a negotiated acquisition or an eminent domain acquisition.
Yeah.
So they're both acquisitions.
Got it.
So one can be negotiated,
it.
the others, yeah.
Yeah. We're looking at whose life to impact, and the people who live alongside have concerns, the people on Seal have concerns, the people on Kellogg have concerns, the people in Charleston have concerns, the people on Meadow. And we have to try to do what's in the aggregate right for this city over the long term. And what a huge challenge. And I know, impossible, obviously, to please everybody with anything, particularly this. I do want us to ask, would we be contemplating a negotiated acquisition in some of our more stately neighborhoods? It's not relevant, it's moot. There isn't a train running through those neighborhoods. That is, in fact, what it means to be on the right side of the tracks. But we're asking people on Charleston and Meadow to give up their home in furtherance of this project. And as a matter of equity, I want us to be sure that we are not asking something of Charleston and Meadow that we wouldn't ask in different parts of town when it comes to the negative impact on a particular small number of homeowners. That's it for me.
Well, maybe first thing is to go back to Churchill, and that we do have property impacts from Churchill. Maybe we should review that just to put that question to rest.
Just to confirm, Ripon and Philip, are you looking up the statistics of partial? And if, I don't believe there are any full acquisitions required, but it would be worth noting the number of partial acquisitions involved. Also, to the council member's point, not directly related to the grade separations, but I think it is fair to note that with the council and other cities, discussions of improvements needed along San Francisco Creek, that also property acquisitions may be necessary there. So the same conversations apply with respect to when needed, whether it's a negotiated acquisition or actual eminent domain acquisition. Typically, or probably more frequently for temporary construction easements, but also in some cases for permanent acquisition.
Thank you. That's helpful. I would love to know the number, to Councilmember Burt's point about Churchill, the extent to which we have partial or complete negotiated acquisitions likely with that scenario.
And if I can just offer a couple comments on kind of this broad subject. So the policy direction had been to really pursue alternatives that would minimize property acquisitions at all the locations. And we have real trade-offs there. And we haven't, as Nadia noted, these designs and the number of properties impacted are based upon the current design, but not the refinements that are potential as we move forward in the next stages of engineering, with the intention to come up with designs that will further reduce those impacts. So unfortunately, until that's done, we can't figure out what we can design away. More broadly, something that has been an education process for me on VTA, as we've been going through two real big mega projects, the BART tunnel from Berryessa to almost all the way to Santa Clara Station, and then the East Ridge Light Rail grade separation, separated light rail system, 2.5 miles there. We have massive numbers of property acquisitions, and they're all painful. And the truth is that it's not at all uncommon, and in many cases the norm, that there are properties impacted when you have major transportation projects. And what we want to do is really have the best designs we can to minimize that, and the best balance of priorities for the community as a whole and the individuals impacted. One of the things that I saw even in some of the one or more of the comments from members of the public when we were talking about viaducts is an assertion that it would be the least expensive. Far from it, at least from the standpoint of the numbers that we received from AECOM, and these were produced in 2019 based upon estimated 2025 cost of construction. So for one thing, the cost of construction has ballooned for civil engineering projects. We've seen on the BART tunnel in that same time frame almost a doubling of the cost. So these numbers are of value on relative as relative numbers to each other, but we should fully anticipate that these are significant understatements of what we're going to be experiencing. But and I'll also add that there was skepticism about some of these estimates, but they're still what we have to work with as a starting point. So the hybrid was estimated to be 190 million to 230 million for the two locations combined. I will say that, you know, if you just look at Ringsdorf and others, it's far exceeding that for a single location. So that number, a number of us questioned that number at the time.
What was the time frame of that?
Well, it was done in 2019, so 5 years ago, based upon projected costs of 2025. So they, so the 2025 dollars, if we were actually ready to break ground in 2025, those numbers will have gone up. And the date at which we actually will end up constructing is now significantly beyond that. So you've got the inflationary factors, and then you've got a time frame of more years of inflation. But that was, call it, you know, in the vicinity of a little over 200 million for the two of those. The underpass was estimated to be 340 to 420 million, and the viaduct 400 to 500 million. But once again, the number that I was on a relative basis, I was most skeptical of was the hybrid number.
Just to clarify, the viaduct that was at 400 to 500 was under the assumption that we did not need any shoe fly tracks. And that assumption has now changed dramatically. So in addition to regular cost escalation and post-COVID cost escalation, you have a very significant technical thing that has changed. And the electrified shoe fly tracks are so expensive that was another driving factor at looking at underpasses, because building them is just expensive and hard. I will also say that the cost of the underpass was assuming the need for shoe fly tracks, because we were not able to get yet a cost estimate of what might happen if we did box jacking, which may make the price go up or down. We just didn't have enough soil information. There's a lot more. So part of the reason why this advancing these alternatives forward is going to give you a lot more clarity is there's a lot more math that needs to be crunched, and we know more than we did in 2019 when we were playing with these numbers.
I'll add on the box jack construction. At the time, it was not known whether that would be an allowable construction method by Caltrain. They've come back and it's actually a construction method that is embraced in the quarter-wide crossing strategy.
Sorry, could
You say that again.
It's the box jack construction. You're familiar with that is, yeah. At the time these alternatives were evaluated in 2019, it was not really allowed to be on the table because AECom said that they didn't know whether it'd be permissible by Caltrain. And what we have today is that Caltrain has come forward and said, no, not only is it permissible, it's a preferred method, and for two reasons. The cost impact, but the construction time frame and disruption impact. It greatly shortens that massive construction impact, which is something that we tend to gloss over. But this is a massive disruption, whatever construction we do. So as Nadia noted, that underpass might be impacted favorably as a result of box jack construction, although we still don't know because there are geotechnical and utility related issues that have to be determined. And the viaduct probably has higher costs, almost certainly has higher costs. We don't know how much, as if it has that shoe fly impact.
While we're on these kinds of metrics, which are so helpful, can you remind me, I know I've seen it in the documents, but you may have it top of hand or somebody may have it top of mind, the approximate time of construction in years for hybrid versus underpass versus viaduct?
Yeah.
While Rippon's pulling that up, we'll take turns here.
I've got it too.
Okay, great. I was going to say, let me get back to the earlier question about the property impacts for the partial underpass, if I can. And I just want to note, this has been discussed a lot, but there's a real reason why we say negotiations rather than, eminent domain or any of the takes or any of those things and I know that a lot of it's been said already, but I want to point out that the goal of the negotiation or the goal of the outcomes for the negotiations can really be set. So it could be like relocation assistance to help, or the goal could be to help them get a similar type home in the same city. So that kind of stuff can be set. But just to note, the partial underpass property impacts, driveway modifications, removal of and relocation of the property, the planter strips along Alma Street. Approximately 15 properties. That was estimated for Kellogg. It'd probably be quite similar for Seal. And then also the loss of street parking and the removal of trees in the planter strip at.
When you just said 15 properties, what was the impact on those 15 properties?
That's the driveway, it's the removal and relocation of the planter strip and some driveway modifications. And then similarly on Kellogg or Seal, I guess I'll just go with that now. It's about 300 feet of similar loss of street parking and removal of trees and planter strip. So it'd be on Seal, it was 5 properties, but on Seal, it's 4 properties impacted on each side.
In Churchill itself?
No, Churchill itself.
Yes.
There was something in Churchill.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, hang on, I don't have that right here.
No, it's multiple properties.
It's like the backyards and that the side yards of
well, let's look it up. It's more significant, I believe.
Let me find that.
And
I believe it was this, it's the property on the corner of Churchill. And it's a sliver, what they call a sliver impact.
But then I thought it went beyond that to the next couple of properties,
I
depending
think
on
it's 2
the-
properties along that
Yeah.
one, but again, I'm hesitant to be so precise about how many because this, if we think about drawing with crayons versus a very fine point pen, these are big crayon numbers. So-
Well, and just so people appreciate, for instance, on these factors, not only the design, but the constraints from Caltrain. When we were talking about this in the last month or two, depending on the clearance that we have, it moves back the point at which the down ramp has to begin, which affects more properties. So those are important details. I just on the construction time estimate for the hybrid, it was listed as 4 years. For the underpass without the jackbox construction, it was listed as 3.5 to 4. For the viaduct, without shoe fly, it was 2 years. And I didn't mention the trench. The trench was listed at that time, you can add whatever multiplier you want, 800 million to $950 million and 6 years. I will add that my appreciation of trenching and tunneling has gone up. Not only because I'm created last year and I'm chairing the VTA Oversight Committee on the BART tunneling, but I spent all of last Thursday in tunnels in LA, tunnels and stations under construction. And I had anticipated that it would be a very complex construction project. And I walked away understanding that I had grossly underappreciated it. It's unreal, the complexity of that. Now, a trench is not as complex as that, but man, it was beyond imagination. Longer story. But it is these, when we talk about these construction projects, we kind of tend to think, oh yeah, they'll go in and bring a backhoe and, and we see a YouTube video of a jackbox construction. They go chunk, 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 and boom, it's done. It's a lot more complicated. Yeah.
I did want to point out if there's any members of the public who were concerned about the property acquisitions, if you go to connectingpaloalto.com and up at the top, there's a link for presentations and reports. If you scroll down to February 5th, 2020, that was the XCAP meeting where we talked about that. And we actually had a land use attorney, Norm Mattioni, who's a specialist in this, come and speak. So you can watch the video of the meeting. We also have a transcript of the entire meeting that we put in. And it's also, I believe, in the final report as well, for those that are interested.
And Nadia, I don't know if you have recollection of kind of the summary of what are the impacts. We had a number of speakers who were under a notion that somehow they would not be made whole. But both, my understanding is that there is both, it's fair market value, it's full value of the property, and that there are tax benefits in those occasions. Is that correct?
Yeah, I'm going to leave legal to legal and just let you hear it from the attorney's mouth because they will have all the right caveats. And so I would encourage you to watch the video. Again, it's February 5th, 2020, connectingpaloalto.com under presentations and reports.
And having said that, I don't want to, even if residents are made whole economically, that doesn't mean it's not a very significant event and impact on them. So I don't want to, even under that condition, underappreciate the impact.
Sorry, and I just want to refer back to the, it was the February 20th Rail Committee meeting where we talked about this, and just basically sliver acquisitions of the property fronting Churchill Avenue, and really the total number of parcels impacted for Churchill. It's 8 at Seal, 15 total partial acquisitions, 3,600 square feet approximately, and 0 full acquisitions. That's at Churchill with Seal is 8. The
question was how many are at Churchill? Are we breaking that down?
Yeah,
I believe there are a total of 4.
That sounds,
And,
that's consistent with my memory. Yeah.
Yeah, and if you look at the conceptual property impacts map, you can see the separate properties.
Okay.
And with regard to property acquisitions, I'd like to also assure you that there are federal and California state laws. Since we are in having federal and state funding, we will conform to all those regulations for fair market value evaluations and negotiations with the property owners.
If I may, thanks for all this. We just had our housing element meeting last night to great success moving forward with our 3rd round on that. And an outside of the box thinking kind of way, it makes me wonder as we look to build more housing, if there's I know there was an allusion to the corner of Meadow, I think, where there's an apartment complex and maybe it has to be taken down for the construction to happen, but then there's actually property remaining and something could be rebuilt. It makes you wonder if we could actually get more housing out of this in the long run. With respect to Charleston, for example, if you had totally hypothetically, if you had a set of residents who are terribly upset with, the demolition, partial removal of property, if some kind of agreement could be reached where, we have to acquire your property in order to build this roundabout. However, we have a proposal, which is that we would build a cottage cluster or some other sort of dwelling unit situation where you get to stay in your neighborhood. You get to be like, the city will help you make that happen. The city would make that happen. It's very outside the box. I don't have a clue really what I'm talking about practically. I just wonder conceptually if there might not be if there are 6 houses impacted or 4 houses impacted or 3, if we might somehow end up with double that because we are doing this massive infrastructure project. Could the city take that on? Have we contemplated any kind of creative solution like that might be a win-win for the affected property owners and for the city in terms of adding a few more units of housing?
I'll just wade in that conceptually, I think those are interesting concepts. They're both legal issues, and I'm not sure that it would be prohibitive, but one of the things is that agencies are not allowed to really pay above fair market value. And then you'd have the issue of how do you get enough neighbors who would have be impacted to want to do the same thing. But I don't think we can resolve that today, but yeah, okay. And one thing we hadn't talked about related to this is as we're looking at Charleston and particularly Meadow and the bike and ped issues, is this prospect of also having a bike and ped crossing in the vicinity of Loma Verde that would potentially precede construction, so that even though we've repeated every time I bring it up and concern about construction impacts on bike and ped crossings, and the answer is, oh, no, we will we'll make sure we get people through. Having just gone through that set of construction sites in LA and riding bikes through and trying to have a path created through construction sites is it ain't the same thing. And I continue to be really interested in one that we've always identified the long-term need for a bike and ped crossing anywhere between East Meadow and Cal Ave. We have none in this community. It's the longest stretch in the community. So that was a need that has been identified for 2 decades, even without this. But this project, in my mind, drives a strong need to move that ahead of construction of the grade separation projects. So it's in place. People have got a great new access there. And I will add, and something that I neglected to mention under the seal in Pierce Park, is that the benefits to that not only go to the residents and the safe routes to school, but the huge number of workers on Stanford University. In the case of the seal connection, it goes right out to Sarah, and a route right into campus there. And in the case of the vicinity of Loma Verde, has the potential to be a route up to the ballpark path and the whole research park. So there are a whole bunch of benefits to that, getting better east-west connection by bike in our community. And this one is, I think, the biggest missing link. And so I just want to put that out there. We haven't discussed how the Loma Verde relates to this, the rest of this discussion.
This is a potentially an opportune time, just to mention that we did recently hire a senior planner that was starting to work on the additional bike ped crossings, was planning to hire a consultant to work on that, and then, start the work that's necessary in order to apply for grants. However, his work is currently put on hold so that he can address the council directed work on the El Camino bikeways project. So potentially that's a shorter range project, and we've just got a minor delay, but I do want to note that for the rail committee's awareness.
Good. So as we try to narrow our discussion, we've been going around and airing elements of this, and we have to come together to have recommendations. I'll just put out a few kind of straw man aspects to what our recommendations might be. One is under the underpass to seek design refinements that would further reduce property impacts. Second, to have those design efforts to optimize bike and ped crossings at the grade crossing locations, separate from the Loma Verde. Third, to look at where feasible, improving the bike infrastructure beyond the study area. So connections to Park Boulevard. As we cross, we have issues of, okay, we just crossed, but how does it connect with this major bike boulevard? And that needs to be refined some. And some of these are related to the bike and ped master plan. And then additional evaluation on the traffic circle at East Meadow to see whether one lane and can be used to achieve the outcome and reduce property impact. So it's related to that first bullet. I'm sorry, Charleston. And then refining the construction processes and impacts to better understand what mitigations we might be able to take to reduce the construction period or the impacts during construction. So those were a few things on the underpass. At the higher level, we have the question of whether we want to reconfirm the partial underpass as the preferred alternative for Churchill. That would be one action. Second, to whether we want to eliminate the trench alternative at Charleston and East Meadow. Third, whether we want to advance the underpass and the hybrid as the preferred alternatives for the FRA grants. And then lastly, whether we
at Meadow and Charleston.
Yes. And then those other things that I just mentioned as part of refinements for proceeding with the 15% engineering on the underpass. I can't think of other refinements on the hybrid, although I will put out there one conceptual thing. When we took the vote in 2021 on the preferred alternatives for Charleston Meadow, there was discussion of hybrid or a viaduct. And one of the things that I raised as a question is, well, could we not have a consideration of a hybrid with a viaduct construction method? And I was shot down and said, no. Hybrids are berms and viaducts are podiums. Well, we now have from our corridor crossing strategy that Caltrain has clarified that earthen berms are a construction method and hybrids or viaducts are a design, an elevation design. So you could have as Burlingame has moved toward, they're a full height earthen berm. And at the same time, the corridor crossing strategy has said, no, you can actually build a podium hybrid. And a hybrid means that you have some level of a dip. So, you know, up in San Carlos and Belmont, when we look at that earthen berm, we tend to think it's a full berm, but it's actually a hybrid. There's a modest dip, but it's not a big dip, but it's called a hybrid. When we were told, describe the hybrids, oh yeah, we go up some, we go down some. I said, no. We go up a bunch and we go down a little. There's not a great deal of difference between what we're talking about at our locations of a hybrid and a viaduct elevation. Now, if we went with a hybrid that had a podium construction like a viaduct, what would be the benefits? And what would be the impacts? It would presumably cost more because those structures are more expensive than earthen berms. But it would have a lot of the same perceived benefits of the viaduct. It's a more open visual impact. So this whole question of whether you have a wall dividing two halves of a community, you would have roughly the benefits of the viaduct that we've talked about. You'd have some that height, it would shorten, I should say, it would shorten the distance of the viaduct and make the viaduct cheaper than what we had in that cost comparison. Because by not going as high, you don't have to spread it out horizontally as far. And then you have some permeability going under that viaduct, but that's limited in its value, just like the full height viaduct, because we go, oh, well, if we had a viaduct, you could cross under it. Well, cross from where to where? We don't have signals and crossings across Alma that would really be able to take much advantage of that. There might be a few locations that it would open up for bike and ped crossings there. You would still have to figure out how you'd pop through to park if you did that. But say if you had something at the Alma shopping center or something further south, where south of Charleston, we really don't have good, safe crossing for bikes and peds there. So it would open it up for some future permeability there. There are complexities to it. But I just wanted to put that out there conceptually because we never really explored it. And since Caltrain come back with these clarifications, we hadn't really said, this is something we want to look at. But think of that podium as a construction method and the height is the design. Yeah.
Where do we want to be tonight?
And sorry, you missed some of this. I shouldn't have gone.
I didn't know if it was a motion or if it was.
What I did was kind of put out these straw man considerations for a motion.
Okay.
So to get us thinking about that. So it's confirm the partial underpass as preferred at Churchill. We already recommended seal. Eliminate the trench.
Yeah, no, I heard all those.
Oh, you heard that?
Yeah.
Okay, and then under the underpass, maybe that's what did you hear all those?
The underpass.
The underpass, seeking ways to reduce property impacts, optimize the bike and ped crossings. This is all under the 15% engineering. We want these things pursued. Improve bike ped infrastructure beyond the study area, where appropriate. Look at potential reducing the traffic circle to one lane or roundabout to one lane, and better understand construction impacts and mitigations from construction methods.
I might add one, picking up on what Julie had to say. I don't disagree with you, Julie, that, until people see something, they don't really know what it looks like. I mean, we're kind of all that way. So it would be pretty easy to do. I'm speaking for you guys now. That's a bad idea. But those are just art designs. It's not engineering. So that's not as a speed of sound kind of thing. You could just have some conceptual drawings of what this thing really looks like in real life. And the berm is an appealing way to look at it because it's on grass. You know, it's higher, but it's on grass. So that could be something we would put on there. Is we could just ask for some more.
Well,
some
it
more-
might be grass.
Yeah.
There's none in San Carlos.
No, but what I meant was it's not a tower. It's not just you know, an erector set kind of look. You know, it's more natural looking.
So are you, and this, actually presumably would be part of that, 15% engineering is you're gonna have renderings and perhaps videos.
Yeah, that's what I'm saying. It's just, you know, let's design what that train and the berm can look like when it's up next door. So it's not an erector set.
maybe, what we're really talking about is a better understanding of all, design.
Elevations.
Well, not just the elevations, but it's the designs, more as, better aesthetic designs, lower impact designs for berms and hybrids is what I'm talking.
Yeah, I use the term elevations, like looking at elevations of an architectural drawing, 3-story or 5-story building. So just the side of sideways view, you know, this is at grade, this is what's going to look, this is on the berm. That's what I meant by elevation.
Okay, so there is.
I didn't mean upward.
Sorry, I wanted to talk earlier about the roundabout thing, because I think we've brought this up a couple different times, and we've had both AECom and our traffic consultant Hexagon come to talk about that, and Hexagon had modeled it and found that a 1-lane roundabout failed. And not just it failed like from the traffic perspective that Nadia had mentioned, but that it was actually unsafe to merge the vehicles in the distance. And I just want to note that it has been studied, it has been looked at, and at this level of conceptual design that we can study it more, but I think we're still going to find the same issues that the traffic consultant had identified.
I also wanted to point out that on the Connecting Palo Alto website, we do have all the different renderings. I will say, I'm not sure, maybe staff can look because I think we're missing some of the viaduct renderings. I see a lot of renderings for the underpass. But the viaduct one is only 1 page and it's only the little pictures, and I think we had more. And so we might want to see if we can put more of those up for the public.
Sure, we can take a look at that one.
Yeah.
And with regards to the roundabout, I think just we want to say that we will refine that further to see if we can reduce the impact of the size of the roundabout as we move along in the design. But 2-lane roundabout was what was required to be operational because of the weaving distance and the elevation difference between the road that's coming up on Charleston and the ramps that are coming off the Alma Street. So.
There was some refinement where they pushed the roundabout further back, I think, than where it originally was, because we were trying to see if that would change the size. But I mean, given that there has to be more engineering work done, I mean, I don't know if that changes anything, and it's still possible. At least understanding that it's a goal that the council or the committee would have is worth understanding when they go and turn their knobs.
Yeah, I think that's exactly, and just generally that same thing with the aesthetics. It's like those are things that we can have as goals as we progress further in the design process.
I am surprised to hear hybrid come into the conversation at this juncture, only because it feels as if it's not been something we've been discussing a lot lately. We're hearing a lot about underpass. We're hearing a community response on viaduct, asking that it be considered more thoughtfully. And so help me understand why we're talking about underpass or hybrid as the preferred, why hybrid as a preferred option?
Well,
I would like to see underpass and viaduct as the preferred option.
Well,
That's Churchill, right?
But let me just say that that's where we stand. That's the council preferred alternatives right now. So that's the marching orders to us, and has been for 3 years. Question is, do we want to recommend anything different? But that's why we're.
Yeah. Right. I'm just mean in recent conversations, we've been looking at renderings of underpass and hearing from the public about viaduct, and I've not been hearing a lot about hybrids. We decided to bring the viaduct back up off of whatever list it was on to reconsideration. And so I'm interested in, why are we not furthering that analysis, understanding that the renderings were not great, that visual and noise were not addressed as fully as they might have been. That's the kind of community concern I've been hearing, or community interest I've been hearing in viaduct, which is why I'd like to see it advanced as one of the options that goes to 15%.
Oh, so that would be an additional possible recommendation, is to further evaluate the viaduct. It was something that from my standpoint, I was in part because of the cost and other reasons, I was skeptical but open to re-examining it. But with what we had received from Caltrain in terms of the construction impacts and the location, that had made the viaduct go from an expensive possibility to one that's even more problematic.
But what they said is they weren't asked to consider the flip. They were asked to consider this thing that turned out to be problematic with Alma, 2 lanes of it being taken. And they didn't look further at the flip because they weren't asked to look at it. And I would hate for it to be removed from consideration out of you didn't formally ask us, therefore we didn't look at it, even though we think it might be a better solution. You haven't asked us to look at it. This is such a big consideration. And it's, what I gleaned from Rob was that, no, that the flip could actually work. And, without this terrible impact on Alma, meaning that's what I mean by it could work. So I would just hate for us to say, well, we didn't ask the right question of Caltrain, so too bad. Like, I'd like us to ask the right question of Caltrain, and it feels like going to 15%, putting it on the list for one of the 2 considered and moving to the next step would allow us to really fully understand what is the viaduct option.
This is not super germane to the exact what you're talking about, but I just want to point out, it was more that we wanted to preserve what the city's process had been with an alternative. It wasn't like some sort of staff direction where it was, oh, you can't look at this or that. It was just, this is the time we had, and we wanted to be faithful to what had been come up with. So
appreciate that. And what I'm understanding, though, is that when that approach was evaluated, how it would actually be constructed resulted in a realization, oh my goodness, 2 lanes of Alma are going to be taken because we need this 25-foot buffer because of the electrification. And then the further thinking went, it could be flipped, but we weren't asked to study the flip, so we're not going to study it further. But there are folks at Caltrain who know it could be flipped, and that makes it a more viable solution. Let's call it viaduct option A, turns out to be problematic, but the flip is viaduct option B, which hasn't really been properly studied.
And if I may, I think if Rob were here, this is where he would then pivot to the details matter. And I think that even with the flip, studying the art of the possible is one thing that may provide additional benefit. But I think the other bold kind of statement and understanding that we had received from the city and our early analysis was that it would still be a rather large impact to the homeowners that are going to be that much moving the viaduct that much closer to homes. And so it would actually still be quite a major obstruction in terms of having the structure up in the air now being that much more closer to the homes. So I think that the concern has always been the critical concern with the viaduct has always been the obstruction and how it obstructs view, right? And the cost, which is what I believe Councilmember Burt had raised. And so, yes, can we study it to further understand from a transparency perspective what are the pros and cons? absolutely in preliminary engineering. But does that still take away from, I think, the critical issue, which is cost and then obstructing view, right? That will also be impactful to the community and the residents who live close to that.
Let me ask a related question. And this goes to something that I was wanting to discuss at the end of our meeting, which is our upcoming meeting schedule. But we were looking to make recommendations out of this meeting. And then we have a study session with the council. And then Philip was talking about a workshop with the community. So a workshop, you called it?
So yeah, we haven't exactly determined what it's going to be called, but yeah, it's some sort of town hall type meeting.
And his suggestion was that that might actually be a combined rail committee meeting. I'm not sure that I would advocate that. And the question whether we would have a May rail committee meeting, which I actually inclined to have. But it does bring up a question of if we wanted to have the flip evaluated anymore by Caltrain staff, would a month be adequate to give us some additional feedback on the feasibility of that? So that the May rail committee meeting, even though we would not have made a recommendation out of this one that would go to the council study session, we could inform the council that we're having this additional analysis being done. And out of the May meeting, we may or may not make a recommendation to the council to evaluate or to include the viaduct as an alternative to the hybrid. So first, for Caltrain staff, would a month allow you to give us additional feedback on the flip?
I don't believe so. It is such a change it would basically require, I believe, and Edgar, you can correct me, all new conceptual plans and profiles, I think, which a month would not be sufficient for that. But Edgar, if there's anything you want to add there, I'll throw it to you.
The concept itself would need to be further evaluated from a transition perspective, as well as the profile and its integration into 4-track on the north end. For a month would be extraordinarily difficult to be able to provide the information needed for a decision.
Okay, thanks. So then we do have a question for us today, which is based upon that information, do we want to recommend the hybrid be studied further? We're trying to narrow our alternatives. And we have two alternatives right now, the underpass and the hybrid.
Yeah, the trench.
Oh, and the trench. So are we straw poll? Are we good? We're expecting that we're going to support removal of the trench from options?
Yeah.
Okay. We'll vote on that officially, but so then out of do we add a third one back, or do we and we need to get it down to 2, right? 1, yeah. The council would go to 1.
Advance 2. Can't
Yeah.
advance 2 to the 15%. Yeah.
Yeah.
But ultimately.
Of
Yeah.
course, ultimately got to build one.
And would we be looking at the viaduct as an alternative to the hybrid instead of the hybrid, or in addition to the hybrid, and we go back up to 3, which doesn't really make the progress we're looking for? So Julie?
Can I ask on a hybrid, what's the slope? How many, so I've seen the drawings of the underpass and the slope and how many properties are impacted. Hybrid is a much smaller dip. It's like 5 feet down. And so I can't do the math, but obviously a much smaller impact this way. There are no property, no negotiated acquisitions for a full house with the hybrid?
It's driveway modification.
Driveway and plantings, okay. Who can articulate for me in layman's terms, not as a matter of technicalities, but more of a quality of life, quality of community. Why is hybrid not considered more attractive than underpass? Is it the wall berm that separates east and west is considered less attractive than the whole underpass?
I think one of the challenges with this project as a whole is the eye is in, it's everyone has a different reason for why it's a visually aesthetic or visually detrimental to them. So that's one challenge. I will say just in general with this, yeah.
There, we often thought of it at XCAP is what's your very best at grade or below grade alternative and what's your very best above grade, because all of them are going to be pretty awful. And so continuing to advance one of each was sort of a strategy. Ultimately, the biggest advantage of the underpass over the hybrid is how traffic ends up in the end, because your intersections will still fail with a hybrid or a viaduct. Whereas with the underpass, the bikes and peds can go under Alma, and the traffic signals are more Bs and Cs and better than Fs, basically. So that's sort of the largest thing. I did have a thought that we might consider. Burlingame had selected a hybrid alternative where they were partially submerging Broadway, like about as much as ours, like 5 feet, I think, and then had this elevated. It's up about 15 feet. And eventually what they did with value engineering was they ended up with a full berm. If we advance the hybrid, which is from a track perspective and all of the other stuff in the same position that you're thinking about for the viaduct, once you get some analysis back, you could think about whether there was some advantage to the construction method differences between an earthen berm and some visual space underneath. Yeah, I will say part of the difference between the viaduct and the hybrid was sound. So there's the sound of the trains and the horns, and everything gets better overall when you build these things. But the berm provides some buffer of the noise of Alma to the homes on the west side. It also creates a bounce of noise to the homes on the east side, but that can be mitigated with sound absorbing concrete. If you build something that has the viaduct spacing underneath, the sound now kind of passes through. So that might be one thing to consider. And I think the other thing that is probably more relevant to any discussion about the viaduct is that the people that are most interested in the viaduct are most interested in using either this linear park or having this idea that you have use of this space. And if we cannot overcome that in any way, then it really comes down to what are your cost differentials and what matters in terms of keeping everyone on the same plane, in which case you might end up back where the hybrid is, and frankly, do the value engineering to get you back to a Burlingame hybrid, which is essentially an earthen viaduct of sorts. It's just 5 feet higher. It's 5 to 7 feet is the difference. I hope that
That
helps.
linear park thing we haven't talked about today, but that was one of the strongest reasons that people were inclined to the viaduct. And based on our input from Caltrain, that's not really much of an option. Yeah.
Well, it would be it's a markup and board level decision. So yeah, just to clarify that, it's a land use based on the railroad land use decision for the board. So
I thought we'd heard that there were some constraints that given the amount of lead you need to build the viaduct up. I remember it was my first meeting, that there's so much that has to go into supporting the upward slope that you're really left with very little linear feet
And
underneath
that
it.
Caltrain says they want to keep the surface tracks. That was the other big shock.
But with the flip, they would not be keeping the surface tracks. No,
They
they
would.
if there's
checked with Rob.
if there's one that goes into Alma, that would not maintain. The other one has to be studied more in in PE.
But I thought that the retention of the surface track was for utility going forward as opposed to construction.
Correct. But it's back to the full envelope of possibilities. It's something that would be studied further in PE when there's more detailed operations study. So.
makes it tough to us make a decision.
I understand.
If we're gonna rule in or rule out something that is dependent on information we don't yet have.
I understand. We also don't fully have it, which is the message.
I did want to remind everyone, so procedurally, the council voted to remove the viaduct alternative in 2021. It was an official council action. So question for maybe the city attorney and staff of, if you decide that you do want to raise that back, what does that mean in terms of the number of procedural steps you need?
It would be a recommendation of the committee, and then the council would have to act on it and agree to it. Yeah. Okay, so this sounds like the more difficult decision. The other things seem like we had general consensus on. Ed, what are your thoughts on inclusion or not of the viaduct alternative as opposed to the hybrid?
I think Nadia, again, gave us good input on how they got to that originally, and that really hasn't changed. And I think that berm slash viaduct, or viaduct, or whatever you want to call it, could sort of almost be a hybrid of the hybrid. I mean, that could be pretty interesting. So I think that's the preference. And clearly the underpass is the other preference. The only other option, I hate to make it complicated, and I don't even know the cost of this, but since that other analysis is going to take more than a month, if it took 3 months, do we want that going on in parallel while we're still, kind of moving this through public outreach and things like that?
The grants, so maybe if you can
Yeah.
refresh again.
Yeah, I mean, that's kind of so even a delay of 1 month, if we were to be able to get the data from Caltrain in 1 month, or the review in 1 month, would make things challenging, because really what we need, or what we're aiming for, is a decision in order to advance this in June, in order to meet our grant agreements and timelines. So
what's the range of that grant again?
Yeah, so we have two separate grants. We have one for 6 million and then one for 20. What is it? 20. Yeah, 23.79. So it's like
we
30.
have to narrow it to one alternative at that by June, or two?
Yeah. So most common, you have one alternative with potentially a backup alternative, but it's, it is an occasion that two alternatives could be moved forward into that
So
phase.
we could also frame it as a preferred and a backup then. So essentially continue to evaluate two of them, with one being perhaps the backup.
Yeah, so that would be, I think, a logical path. I do want to note that Caltrain potentially will be taking over this process as the lead implementing agency at this phase. And so it really depend on what Caltrain's comfort is with that approach.
Generally, you have, as you said, Councilmember Bird, you have one, and Philip, you said you have one locally preferred alternative. I think that there is a path to explore two at Meadow Charleston as a kind of initial stage of PE. I think what Caltrain would need to be figured out is what exactly folks would want, what exact information folks would want to have to be able to make a decision as to which one would then proceed into a full-blown 35% preliminary engineering. And I don't think we need to decide that today, but that would need to be something that be figured out before figuring out exactly how that step proceeds. I think we're open to, you could consider it preliminary engineering, but if you study both full bore, that raises costs for sure.
So for the 29th council meeting, we could go in with that direction, with the primary and a backup.
Well, yeah, just noting for the 29th, it's just a study session, so we don't have to have a recommendation, or we're not planning a recommendation. That report's actually published this week, I think.
We could have two for the 29th.
Well, For the 29th, we're just going to inform them whatever we discussed here, but we've already, I think the report is published or is going to publish this Thursday, so it's already written. So it's not going to have what happened today. For
Well,
the
not in the
June,
report. We can still present and discuss.
yeah,
and-
of course,
and have
of
it in
course.
the
But
presentation.
what I'm saying is there won't be an action on that item. It's a study session. So the June 3rd meeting is the council meeting where we're targeting an actual action of council.
My concern about so right now, the materials we got for today on Viaduct were basically the materials we got for March on Viaduct, which said, there are all these problems with it. The fact of there being a flipped alternative isn't in there. And I would be concerned if the study session we're going into basically recapitulates that, does it? No mention that there's a flip alternative that Caltrain mentioned to us, said they had not been asked to study, said it is much less of an impact on Alma and therefore potentially feasible.
I think we can add. I believe we can add some language in the report that reflects that information to this council.
I think where I'm coming from, bigger picture, if I may say, colleagues, is hybrid and underpass and hybrid both entail some impact on private property, as does Viaduct. Viaduct impacts view for a set of people who live alongside the train, and hybrid and underpass impact the literal property of people, a smaller number of people to a greater extent. And that is, I think, an important policy question or value question that I would like to see put to council.
Yeah, I want to go back to the cost estimates. And if we were to take the 2019 estimates and double them, and Rippon's nodding his head yes, for the record. So that's probably in the ballpark. We don't know the real numbers. Then we'd be looking at the difference between, 400 to 450 for a hybrid versus 800 million to $1 billion for the viaduct. And significantly more for the underpass than the hybrid. And so from a cost standpoint, when we look at an additional $400 or $500 million without the benefit of the linear park that was kind of the grand vision, which even if we had it, that's an expensive park. A narrow strip park with limited access to it. Yes, great. We've all been different locations where we saw linear parks and we thought they were really great. And they are. But it has limited access and it had limited access. Now it basically doesn't have access according to Caltrain. Right now we can't make any assumption that it would exist. So from a fiscal standpoint, and we have our local funds of the Measure B, which is about $400 million for all 4 grade crossings, 3 that we're working on. And then additional grants at the federal and state level that would hopefully follow on from this 30 million that we have right now. But the real question is, how eligible will we be for additional funding if we, from a cost standpoint, go with a Cadillac instead of a Chevy? And that we don't have, and the fancy chrome of the linear park has turned out to not be there. That's kind of what I'm struggling with.
The linear park, the potential upside of viaduct really exists when we do a viaduct across the entire city. I know, I'm not suggesting that, I'm not actually making a motion.
She's reaffirming that.
Yeah, it's-
It wasn't going down that path.
Yeah, it's a beautiful vision. It's a compelling vision. But I do concede that the linear park option has really, and the art and the jog path, bike path is really receded as a possibility, given the constraints we've heard from Caltrain.
Yeah, and I'll just say, we had a similar discussion on the citywide tunnel. Whereas, well, wouldn't it be great if we just buried this thing? And that would probably only cost, well, based, what?
Yes.
Oh, well, that was way back then. No, based upon, we're looking at 13 billion for 5+ miles in San Jose with 4 stations. So even if you had limited number of stations, for how many miles are we? 5? 4? You know, you'd be lucky if you came under 6 billion. So basically that ain't happening, but it was a great concept. We were all in love with, wow, wouldn't this be great? Talk about linear parks. That's an expensive park. And then there were concepts about development on the air rights. Well, we're talking about a strip that's, plus or minus 100 feet wide with limited access to it. And so I just refresh this to say, okay, we've got certain things that sound ideal in concept. And then when we look at the realities of them, including the cost and funding, they're really not viable. So the question is now, viaduct is not that cost. It's not going to be citywide, which was a lot of what a lot of people were looking at. And I would say that if we're looking at 800 million to $1 billion for this portion of a viaduct, we're billions of dollars for a city-linked viaduct that was never going to be there. So having said all that, why don't we first take a motion on the recommendation of preferred alternatives for the preliminary engineering, and basically 2 preferred alternatives at this point in time. And do we want to hold off on making a recommendation for which is the primary and which is the secondary, and allow that council study session and things to do that? We don't have to make that decision yet, right?
Well, yeah, and that's totally up to the rail committee. I mean, what recommendation would go to council? Noting that ultimately we would hope that council, in order to advance this, would make have a preferred alternative for each location.
Yeah.
But not on the 29th.
No, that's study. No, we could have feedback from them, but they're not going to take any action. Yeah, what?
Which 2?
I like to add that whatever comes, we will be making the scope of work and determining the funding agreement with the FRA based on certain assumptions that we are moving forward at the rail with the city council with those recommendations from the rail committee. Thanks.
Yeah, thanks.
I say underpass and hybrid.
Okay. I will second that. All right, any other discussion on it? I know it's a disappointment to my colleague.
Yeah, I'm disappointed only just because I think the noise and the visual impacts of viaduct took it off the table prematurely. We've brought it back a little too late. We've got a grant deadline we're up against this summer. We have to make forward momentum now. And it just sounds like there isn't time to thoughtfully, to really make the case at this juncture for why viaduct should be the solution at Charleston and Meadow. So I understand the motion. I'm not going to support it because I'm a viaduct. I want to see the viaduct move forward. But I understand where y'all are coming from.
Okay, could the clerk please call the roll?
Councilmember Lowing,
Yes.
Councilmember Burt,
Yes.
Councilmember Lithcott Haynes.
No.
Motion carries.
Okay, and clerk, I just sent you a more detailed motion that would include this, as well as our prior action on the bike ped at Churchill. I don't know if it's come through yet.
One moment, please.
Yeah, and if you can put that on the screen, that would be great. Okay. So numbers 2 and 4, we've already acted on, but we'd fold them into the one motion. How is everybody on the balance of this? I'll give you a minute to digest it.
I know we've included the first one, or at least we've mentioned the first one. But I keep going back and forth. I'm not sure this is necessary. Tim, is there any value in the first item reconfirming what's already
Well,
been
we're
selected?
making, I'll just say that we can say to value. The value is that we're still, after we've done our reviews, that remains the recommendation of the committee to not change course.
Makes sense. Thank you.
With regards to the further study, I would say further refine traffic circle rather than study, because we have studied previously.
Good point.
Thank you.
Yeah, and I'll just say on that, number 1, it's not a necessity, it's a value. Yeah.
Yeah, that's helpful.
I'm just noticing for the underpass, it says optimize bike pedestrian crossings at grade crossings. What do we mean by that? Do we want to be more specific? Because that seems vague.
If I recall, it kind of, I believe it was referring to like where the roadways now currently cross the railroad. So I guess you would call it
That's
like
number 3.
You know, at the actual like underpass below the railroad right of way. I believe that's how I recall that part of the meeting is what that was referring to.
Yeah, it's where we're constructing, there were issues about the slope of the.
Is it more the width of the bike pedestrian crossing that you're
think it's
referring to?
both.
I think that, and the width and the slopes.
Slope, yeah, just the kind of details to optimize them.
So I think you might be able to achieve that by taking off the at grade crossings at the end of it. 'Cause optimize bike pedestrian crossing.
Well, there are other, just to clarify, we're not talking about Seal or Loma Verde. So that's what we were trying to distinguish.
Oh, I think it's under underpass. I don't think that would have.
Oh, it's under underpass.
Right.
Okay. Okay. Yeah.
Under Meadow Charleston as well.
Yeah. Okay, then we can just delete at grade crossings. Okay.
Yeah, so number 2 is or was acted on in the item before.
Yeah.
But
so we're just folding it into, I mean,
potentially
it's redundant, but it's just a question where it's a cleaner recommendation that we had.
Since you already dealt with this as a separate item, I would just leave it there in that item, then doing it here.
Okay, that's fine. We've already dealt with it, and then staff can fold it in this.
Yeah, when we refer to council, it'll be one report and we'll just
Okay.
refer to both items, but we'll keep it so it's in order, so it makes sense to council.
Got it. Okay. Are we okay? All right, then I guess we can take a vote.
Do we technically have a second for this motion?
Maybe not.
Is it the same? Because I'm not sure it's the same motion as the first one.
Second, I'll second it.
Okay, we got a second here.
Yes. Let me-
So is the first motion, okay, so we removed this piece from. So we've got the preferred alternatives and then these are other things. Why do we have number 3, advanced underpass and hybrid as local preferred alternatives? Didn't we just deal with that in the first motion?
Yeah, so that was really basically an independent one that's then folded in under this item. It's the same item. Once again, it could be dealt with separately, but it just cleans it up by consolidating it. We're not changing it. Okay,
So is that moved by Burt, second by Lowing?
yes.
Yes.
All right.
All right, Councilmember Lowing,
Yes, again.
Councilmember Burt,
Yes.
Councilmember Lithcott-Hames.
Yes.
Motion carries.
Okay. Great. And just quickly on our upcoming meetings, we had this question of this public workshop. So we'll have the sequences. We just did these actions. Council will have this going into the study session. And then whether we call it a workshop or whatever, some public meeting. Now, one of the issues is that we'll have already made the recommendations and then had the study session before we have the public meeting of the workshop. And so is the workshop to educate the public and respond to their questions, but to what extent is it to influence decisions? We would still have the final council decisions. So to that degree, it would still be there.
Yeah, so our idea is to capture all of those things. So it'd be to catch members of the public up on the activities of the rail committee and the information that we've learned, to provide them opportunity to ask questions, to look at, individual alternatives, and also to provide feedback that could then inform council when council actually has to take
Their final
action on this.
decision.
Yes.
And then we have the question of the May rail committee meeting, which would follow the date of that workshop. What was the date of the workshop here, tentative?
Yeah, so I believe the tentative date right now for the grade separation, I don't know if we're calling it a workshop or whatever it is, but whatever it is, the community meeting on grade separation is tentatively scheduled for May 15th, I believe. Is that right? Is that the Wednesday? That's the Wednesday. I think it was tentatively scheduled for May 15th, which is a Wednesday. That's something that our comms team is working on the date for that. The current rail committee meeting would need to be, if we were going to schedule it at another date, would need to be rescheduled because I believe it conflicts currently with the current finance committee schedule. And so it would need to be rescheduled. And so the clerk's office would have to pull and work to find another date.
Yeah.
I do want to note, I think there will be challenges finding a date that works for everyone.
Well, we have the finance committee on the 21st, and that's kind of an all-day finance committee. And so we would prospectively have the 22nd or 23rd. I don't know if anybody's got their calendars. And then separate question of what would be the prospective agenda items if we did have one.
Through the chair.
Yeah.
So we did a lot of very technical outreach meetings during XCAP. And I am very supportive of doing as much outreach as we can. I'm concerned about how we would be able to do outreach on what's gone on, simply because the renderings that we have, the images that we have, they don't match what Caltrain has now given us back. And putting out to the public the redlined versions, which looks like I got to see on my French test when you put it out to the public, I think is really dangerous. I also think that particularly with the underpass, where we're giving a lot of direction for a lot of refinement that we know needs to happen, that has sort of overdue from the days of XCAP, I think it's more damaging in some ways to put stuff out that freaks people out that may actually change for the better. And so I wonder if what we're doing, to me, having a study session and then a separate council meeting is actually a large amount of public engagement, because typically you just have a big city council meeting. And I'm just really concerned of what it's like when we put up the existing underpass things, only to explain that, oh yeah, well, we know that that's too wide and we're going to change that. Or we put up the clearances only to be like, oh yeah, but we're going to shrink those and that'll move this way. I mean, already those renderings were hard to understand, and we're not going to spend any money fixing those pictures. But a picture is a lot when people are looking at these things. And I remain really concerned about potentially before what's a significant moment in terms of a step forward, what we're doing to ourselves, and also keeping in mind that you're advancing two alternatives, particularly for Meadow Charleston, which is still outstanding. There's a lot of work that has to come back. So this isn't, if we're not there yet, you're not making your final decision, right? You're really advancing two alternatives that need all of the percentage of engineering that needs to go into them before decisions get made. Not the least of which is, frankly, the cost analysis that is still part of Caltrain's service agreement that will come back once you've selected what those two alternatives are going forward. And so for all those reasons, I don't know that having a town hall, frankly, in the middle of your budget season, in the middle of May, which for most people who have kids is like graduations, end of the year parties, all those things. I think having a study session which allows for the public feedback and getting people involved, and having a second meeting to actually have a decision, but not, subjecting people to basically redlined documents, is probably the best that you might be able to do at this point. Just
Yeah, I
my
was going to comment
2
before,
cents.
that, we're going to get a lot of public comment at April 29th. Just because they're going to see grade step on there, and that's of interest. So we're going to have I was saying, Philip, we're going to have a lot of public comment on the 29th, whether we're ready or not. So.
Yeah, no, thank you. I appreciate these comments. We will definitely discuss this with our communications team. Really do appreciate that feedback. So, and actually, as I was talking, communications was messaging me May 22nd, not May 15th is the date that they're currently proposing. Actually, it was meant to be a transportation town hall initially. And then because of the timing of everything and where we're at with grade separation, we had discussed potentially changing it to a grade separation town hall. But your points are well taken, and we can definitely discuss that. And either way, the plan would be to notice people that are within a certain area of the project, and to send out citywide notification to people to let them know that we'll be discussing this at the city council.
Can I ask, the financials are, if not the greatest variable, obviously one of the most compelling. And we're looking at numbers that Councilmember Byrd has pointed out are 5 years old. Do these numbers come from Caltrain? AECom? So how can we, in the scope of the next couple of months, when we've got to make a decision, come up with fairly reliable estimates of what these options are going to cost us now? Because I think that's got to be, we can't just say these numbers are 5 years out of date and assume we should double them, or 75% or whatever.
Councilmember Litkat-Hames, we are doing some exercise to see how we could do a update to these cost estimates based on the recent events. So there are 3 or 4 components as it relates to these numbers that needs to be updated. One is like Councilmember Byrd mentioned about the base cost that was assumed in 2018, which has significantly changed. The inflation that was assumed from 2018 to 2025, which was 3% prior, but that has never been, in certain years, it has been as high as 7%. So we are looking at those, some certain factors that we can simply do it. Additionally, real estate costs have also significantly changed, and so we are looking at those numbers also. We are hoping that we can bring it to the council meeting, at least if not at the 429, then at the June 3rd meeting.
Box jacking, the cost of that or the benefits of that are going to be incorporated into this?
That will not be done until PE and environmental phase because we do not have the full understanding of the viability, the cost. It requires significant additional, information in estimating. So I know City of Mountain View is looking into that, but it is a lot of effort, which is usually done at a value engineering level during the PE environmental phase.
Yeah, so that's what I was going to point out is this is, and we've had this discussion many, many times. Typically, construction methods is looked at in the next phase. So that's when you typically look at construction methods, which might find that we save money because we've able to use a construction method, or might find that we have to spend more money because of a certain construction method that's necessary.
Yeah, as much as I'm a fan of Jackbox construction, the geotechnical issues affected that water table and utilities and other factors. So we're not at the point of knowing that. Yeah. So where were we? We're done?
Yeah.
So you're going to look at, take the feedback on the prospects of the community workshop, and we can confer on that as follow-up.
Yeah. Sorry, yes. And also, one last thing you mentioned, what items will we have for the potential rail committee meeting next month? The one item that we might have is an FRA agreement, but we're waiting on the FRA for that. So, other than that, we don't have a time-sensitive pending item, I believe, for the next rail committee. Noting that we basically need to have that packet ready by like the end of this week or next week. So,
and there is a possibility that the feedback from the study session would push some things back on us to ask the committee to come back with some other refinement or who knows what.
yes.
Okay, so we'll leave open for right now the possibility of a May rail committee meeting and the date of it.
So the date.
So the clerk's office would need to pull for a possible date, I believe. Because I believe the finance committee is scheduled to go right through this meeting at that time.
Well, Tuesdays are, so, but it could open up Wednesdays and Thursdays for this committee in those 2 weeks.
I'm sorry, so I was not paying attention. So
I
the
just
May
saying-
21st is not something I should be holding.
No, that's finance committee. 22nd is the tentative date for the public workshop. Now, if we didn't have that workshop, that could be a date for rail committee. 23rd is possibility, 29th and 30th. So we don't, if any of those aren't possibilities, that would be good to give feedback, but we won't try to make that decision right now. All good? On that note, we're adjourned.